Hello everyone, I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Emma sat at her desk, her fingers tapping absently on the keyboard as she read through her latest assignment. Her editor, Mr. Lawson, had emailed her the details just an hour ago. The subject was an article on a small, rural town called Ashbrook, famous for its annual harvest festival. Emma had been a journalist for 5 years, covering everything from local politics to quirky human interest stories. But this one was different. Ashbrook, she muttered, scanning the email again. The name itself seemed almost too perfect, like something out of a storybook. The town had a reputation for its unbelievably perfect crops and its strange traditions. But the kicker was the most curious part. No one seemed to know much about the town's history, and anyone who tried to dig deeper was met with a wall of silence. Emma had never been one to shy away from a challenge. If there was a story to be uncovered, he would find it. She grabbed her notebook, scribbled down some preliminary questions, and made a mental note to pack light. Ashbrook was a place she'd never been before, but that would soon change. Emma's car bumped along the narrow, winding road as she made her way deeper into the countryside. The landscape was picturesque, but there was something unsettling about it. The trees seemed to stretch on forever, their twisted branches creating a canopy that blocked out much of the sky. The further she drove, the more isolated the town seemed. There were no billboards, no signs of civilization, just an endless stretch of farmland and forest. Eventually, the road opened up to a small town nestled between rolling hills. Ashbrook. The town was quieter than Emma had expected, even for a rural area. The streets were lined with old, well-maintained houses, their windows reflecting the warm afternoon sun. There was a sense of timelessness here, as though the town had been frozen in place for decades. Emma pulled into the town square, where a few people were walking leisurely between shops and cafes. The townspeople seemed pleasant enough, though their smiles appeared a little too wide, their greetings just a little too cheerful. She parked near the edge of the square and grabbed her bag. The faint scent of fresh bread and something earthy filled the air. She followed the cobblestone streets to the address Maggie had given her. The house was a short walk away, a charming 2-story building with ivy creeping up the sides. Maggie greeted her at the door with a warm smile, her hands resting on the handles of a wicker basket filled with what appeared to be freshly harvested vegetables. She was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a loose bun and a weathered face that spoke of years of hard work. There was something comforting about her presence, but also something that Emma couldn't quite place. "Welcome to Ashbrook, dear," Maggie said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm glad you can make it. I'll get you settled in. Come on in." Emma stepped inside, taking in the cozy, dimly lit interior. The scent of fresh herbs and something sweet lingered in the air. The house was rustic, with wooden beams overhead and a large stone fireplace at the far end of the room. It felt like a place out of time, simple, welcoming, and slightly old-fashioned. "Make yourself at home," Maggie said, leading her to a small guest room at the back of the house. "The festival's not for a few days, but there's plenty to see in the meantime." Emma nodded, setting her bag down on the bed. She was eager to explore the town, but something about the place felt off. It was hard to put her finger on it. The townspeople, the way they smiled a little too brightly, the way the streets were so eerily quiet. It was as if they were all part of some strange, shared secret. As Maggie showed her around the house, Emma's thoughts drifted back to the magazine's assignment. She had come to Ashbrook to uncover the truth behind its mysterious harvest festival. But now that she was here, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the town than the charming facade it presented. That evening, Maggie invited Emma to join her for dinner. The meal was simple but hearty: roast chicken, freshly baked bread, and a salad made from vegetables that seemed to have been pulled straight from the garden. Emma found herself enjoying the food, though she couldn't help but notice the way Maggie seemed to watch her closely as she ate, as though evaluating her reaction to the meal. "So, "Tell me," Maggie said, breaking the silence as they sat at the table. "What brings you to Ashbrook, really? I know your editor sent you, but why here? Of all places?" Emma hesitated for a moment. She hadn't expected the question, and it caught her off guard. "I guess I was just curious. The town has this reputation for its harvest, and the festival sounds unusual. People say the crops here are different, and I wanted to see it for myself." Maggie smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Ah yes, the harvest." Her voice lowered, becoming almost wistful. "It's a special time of year for us. People come from all around to see the festival. But it's more than just a celebration of the crops, you know? There's a deeper meaning behind it, something that ties the town together." Emma raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean by that?" Maggie paused, her expression flickering with something unreadable. "Oh, nothing to worry about. Just old traditions. The kind of things people don't talk about much anymore, but you'll see for yourself soon enough. The festival will be starting in a few days, and once it begins, everything changes around here." Emma nodded, though she felt a chill run down her spine. The way Maggie spoke about the festival like it was something more than just a harvest celebration made Emma uneasy. She decided to let it go for now, but she made a mental note to dig deeper into the town's history. That evening, after dinner, Emma took a walk around the town. The sun had set, and the streets were bathed in the soft glow of street lamps. The town square was nearly empty now, save for a few locals chatting on benches. Emma passed by the small shops, most of them closed for the night, and noticed that the cornfields on the outskirts of town seemed to stretch on forever. The crops were unusually tall, higher than she would expect for this time of year. The corn stalks swayed gently in the breeze, their rustling the only sound in the otherwise silent town. She turned down a narrow street that led toward the fields, curiosity tugging at her. As she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced over her shoulder, but no one was there. Still, the sensation lingered. As she neared the edge of the cornfields, she saw a figure standing in the distance, half hidden by the tall stalks. It was a man dressed in overalls, his back to her. He was staring out over the fields, his posture stiff and unnatural. "Excuse me," Emma called out, her voice carrying through the stillness. "Are you all right?" The man didn't respond. Emma took a few steps closer, her heart beating faster. As she approached, the man turned slowly to face her. His eyes were wide and unblinking, and his expression was blank, as if he were lost in thought. "Can I help you?" Emma asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The man blinked once, then smiled, an unnerving, vacant smile. "The harvest is good this year," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "It's always good." Before Emma could respond, the man turned back to the fields and began walking away, his footsteps slow and deliberate. Emma stood there for a moment, staring after him, her unease growing. She had the distinct feeling that the man wasn't just strange. He was part of something much darker, something that had to do with the harvest. The following morning, Emma awoke to the soft sound of birds chirping outside her window. She stretched and sat up, rubbing her eyes. The room was still dim, the early light filtering through the curtains. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with questions about Ashbrook and the strange encounter in the cornfields. After a quick breakfast with Maggie, Emma decided to take a walk through the town to clear her head. The air was crisp, the sky a pale blue with only a few clouds hanging lazily above. The streets were quiet, but she noticed more people were out and about today. The townsfolk were busily preparing for the upcoming harvest festival, hanging decorations and setting up booths in the square. There was an energy in the air, an excitement that felt a little too forced. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She made her way toward the edge of town, where the cornfields stretched out like a sea of green. As she walked, she noticed how the crops seemed to tower over her, the stalks so tall they nearly reached her head. The corn swayed in the breeze, but it didn't seem natural. The stalks were unervingly uniform, all standing straight and tall, their leaves thick and dark. It was as if the corn was alive, watching her every move. She stepped into the fields, her boots crunching on the dry soil beneath her feet. The air smelled rich with the scent of earth, but there was an undertone to it, a sickly sweetness that made her stomach churn. Emma pushed forward, her curiosity pulling her deeper into the rows of corn. As she walked, she noticed the absence of wildlife. There were no birds, no insects buzzing around, not even the rustle of small animals hiding in the undergrowth. It was as if the entire field was dead, save for the crops themselves. The silence was oppressive, the only sound her footsteps crunching through the dirt. She turned a corner between two rows of corn and stopped dead in her tracks. There, in the middle of the field, was a strange structure. At first, she thought it was just an old, weathered shed, but as she got closer, she realized it was something much more unsettling. It was an altar, a crude stone structure that looked like it had been there for centuries. The stones were covered in moss, and strange symbols were carved into the surface, their meaning lost to time. The altar was surrounded by a circle of burnt-out candles, their wax still dripping down the side. Emma's heart raced as she looked around, her skin prickling with unease. She stepped closer to the altar, her hand reaching out to touch the stone. The moment her fingers brushed against the surface, a cold, almost electric sensation shot up her arm. She recoiled, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Something about the altar felt wrong. She quickly turned and started to walk away, but as she did, she heard a sound behind her. A low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from the very earth itself. She spun around, but there was no one there. Only the corn, swaying in the wind, its rustling now louder than before. Emma's pulse quickened as she made her way back toward the edge of the field. She didn't want to stay there any longer, not with the feeling of being watched, not with the strange whispers in the air. She hurried back to town, her mind racing. What had she just found? And why did it feel like the very ground was alive with some dark, hidden force? The next few days passed in a blur. Emma couldn't stop thinking about the altar in the cornfields, the strange feeling she had when she touched it, and the unsettling whispers that still echoed in her mind. She tried to push it out of her thoughts, but it was impossible. She was drawn to the mystery, to the dark secret that the town seemed to be hiding. The festival was drawing near, and the entire town seemed to be caught up in the preparations. Everywhere she went, there were people decorating the streets, setting up booths, and preparing food. The air was thick with the smell of roasting meat and freshly baked pies. The atmosphere was festive, but there was something about it that felt forced, as though the townspeople were trying too hard to make it seem like a celebration. Emma spent most of her days talking to the locals, trying to get a sense of what was really going on in Ashbrook. She spoke to Jonas, the farmer she had met briefly on her first day, and asked him about the festival. He was a man in his mid-40s with a weathered face and hands that showed the years of hard work he had put into the land. "The harvest is always good here," Jonas said, his voice low and gravelly. "We've got the best crops in the region, but it's not just about the crops, you know. There's something more to it, something that keeps the land fertile year after year." Emma pressed him further. "What do you mean? What's the secret?" Jonas looked around, as if making sure no one was listening. He lowered his voice. "Some things are better left unsaid. Just remember that the festival isn't just about celebrating the harvest. It's about giving thanks to the land, to the forces that keep it all going." Emma was about to ask more, but Jonas quickly changed the subject, as though he had said too much. He clapped her on the back with a friendly smile, but Emma could see the unease in his eyes. That evening, as the sun began to set, Emma walked through the town square, watching the townspeople go about their work. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every time she turned a corner, she felt eyes on her, though when she looked, there was no one there. The festival was just a day away, and Emma knew that the time had come to uncover the truth. She had to find out what the townspeople were hiding, but she was starting to realize that the truth might be darker than she could have ever imagined. The night before the festival, Emma couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in the guest room, the events of the past few days swirling in her mind. The cornfields, the altar, the whispers, everything felt connected, but she couldn't quite piece it together. The people of Ashbrook were hiding something, and Emma was determined to uncover the truth. At dawn, she made a decision. She would visit the town library. Maggie had mentioned it in passing a few days ago, but Emma hadn't had the chance to check it out. It wasn't much, just a small, old building tucked away on the edge of the town square. But if there were any records about Ashbrook's history, the library was the place to find them. The morning was crisp, and the town was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Emma made her way to the library, her footsteps echoing on the cobblestone streets. The library was a small, stone building with ivy creeping up its walls, giving it an ancient, weathered look. A faded sign above the door read, Ashbrook Public Library. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and dust. The shelves were lined with books, many of them worn with age, their spines cracked and yellowed. Emma walked through the aisles, running her fingers over the books as she searched for anything that might shed light on the town's past. She found the history section in the back corner, where several thick volumes were stacked haphazardly on a shelf. He pulled out a book titled Ashbrook, A History of the Land, and flipped through its pages. Most of it was mundane, records of the town's founding, the early settlers, and the development of the Harvest Festival. But as she read further, she began to notice a strange pattern. The records seemed to skip over certain years, or at least there was very little information about specific periods of time. Emma's brow furrowed as she flipped to a chapter about the town's agricultural prosperity. The text described Ashbrook as a place where the soil was rich, the crops abundant, and the weather always favorable. But there was something off about the way it was written, too perfect, too rehearsed. She turned the page, and her eyes fell on a newspaper clipping that had been tucked into the book. The headline read, Ashbrook celebrates record harvest, but at what cost? The article was dated several decades ago, and it was a short piece, but the tone was different from the rest of the book. The writer mentioned the town's prosperity and the Harvest Festival, but there was a subtle warning hidden within the text. Some say the town's good fortune comes with a dark price. No one dares to speak of it, but the harvests are too perfect to be natural. What is Ashbrook's secret? Emma's heart raced as she read the article again, her mind racing. This was the clue she had been searching for. The mention of a dark price was exactly what she had been feeling all along. But what did it mean? What was the price the town had paid for its prosperity? She continued to flip through the book, her eyes scanning the pages quickly. Finally, she found what she was looking for, an entry about the town's founding ritual. The text was brief, but it described a ceremony that took place every year during the Harvest Festival. The ritual was said to be an offering to the harvest god, a figure mentioned only in passing in the town's earliest records. The offering, it seemed, was meant to ensure the fertility of the land, to keep the crops bountiful and the town prosperous. But the article didn't go into detail about what the offering entailed, only that it was a tradition that had been passed down for generations. Emma's hands shook as she closed the book. She had found what she was looking for, but the more she learned, the more questions she had. The harvest god, the offering, the dark price. It all pointed to something far darker than she had imagined. She sat there for a long moment, her mind racing. She had to know more. She needed to find out what had happened in those missing years, the gaps in the town's history. But she also knew that the deeper she dug, the more dangerous it would become. The people of Ashbrook had a secret, and they would do anything to protect it. That afternoon, Emma decided to confront Maggie. She had to know if Maggie knew about the harvest god, about the ritual. Maggie had been kind to her, but there was something unsettling about the way she had spoken about the festival. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that Maggie was hiding something. She walked back to the house, her mind focused on the book she had just read. As she approached the front door, she saw Maggie standing in the garden, her hands covered in soil as she tended to the plants. Maggie, Emma called out, her voice steady, but her heart pounding. Can we talk? Maggie looked up, wiping her hands on her apron. Of course, dear. What's on your mind? Emma hesitated, then took a deep breath. I've been doing some research about Ashbrook, the history of the town, and I found something disturbing. Maggie's expression didn't change, but Emma could see the subtle tension in her shoulders. What did you find? Emma took a step closer, her voice lowering. The harvest festival, the ritual, the offering to the harvest god. What is it? What's the town's secret? Maggie's eyes flickered with something Emma couldn't quite read. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. For a moment, the air between them seemed to thicken, as if the very ground beneath them was holding its breath. You shouldn't have gone digging, Maggie said quietly. Some things are better left alone. The festival is a tradition, a way of life for us. It's been that way for generations. But what's the price? Emma pressed. What does the town give in exchange for its prosperity? Maggie's gaze softened, but there was a sadness in her eyes now. The town has always been blessed with good harvests, with fertile land. But we have to give something in return. It's a sacrifice, Emma. One that has been made for as long as anyone can remember. Emma's heart sank. She felt the weight of the words, the finality of them. A sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? Maggie took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly. The harvest demands blood, Emma. Every year, someone must be chosen to give their life in exchange for the crop. It's the price we pay to keep the town alive. Emma felt as if the ground had been ripped out from beneath her. You mean a human sacrifice? Maggie nodded, her expression grave. Yes, the offering ensures that the crops will grow, that the town will prosper. Without it, everything would wither. We would all starve. Emma took a step back, her mind reeling. She had heard the rumors, but hearing it from Maggie's lips made it real, made it terrifying. But why? Why does the town continue this? Emma asked, her voice shaking. Maggie's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. Instead, she looked down at the ground, as if searching for something in the dirt. Because if we don't, the harvest god will take more than just one, Maggie whispered. The land will turn to dust. The crops will fail, and we will all be lost. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. The town's prosperity had come at a terrible cost, and now she was caught in the middle of it. The festival was tomorrow, and Emma knew that she was running out of time. The day of the festival arrived, and Ashbrook was alive with activity. The town square was filled with stalls, each one offering food, trinkets, and decorations. The air was thick with the smell of roasting meats and sweet pastries, and the sound of laughter and music echoed through the streets. Everywhere Emma looked, people were celebrating, their faces bright and eager, as though they were completely unaware of the darkness that lay beneath their joy. Emma couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in her chest. The knowledge she had uncovered about the town's grim ritual weighed heavily on her mind. The townspeople, so eager to celebrate, had no idea that their lives were built on a foundation of blood and sacrifice. The harvest god demanded a price every year, and someone would be chosen to pay it. She had to find a way to stop it. She couldn't let it happen again. But how? The townspeople were too invested in the tradition, too afraid to break free from it. Even Maggie, who had seemed like a friend, was complicit in the ritual. Emma felt like an outsider now, trapped between two worlds, one of normalcy and one of horror. As the afternoon wore on, Emma wandered through the town square, her eyes scanning the crowd. She was looking for something, anything, that could help her understand how the ritual worked. She needed to know who would be chosen, how they were chosen, and most importantly, how to stop it. She passed by a booth selling colorful ribbons and candles, the vendor smiling at her as she walked by. She nodded politely, but didn't stop. Her eyes were drawn to the old church at the far end of the square, a tall, Gothic structure that seemed out of place among the quaint cottages and shops. It was the one building in town that stood apart from the rest, its spires reaching up to the sky like fingers grasping for something beyond. Emma had never been inside the church, but now she felt a strange pull toward it. There was something about the building that felt significant, as if it held the key to everything she had been trying to understand. She made her way toward the church, the crowd around her growing thicker as the festival reached its peak. The doors were open, and inside, the air was cool and still. The dim light from the stained glass windows cast colorful patterns on the stone floor, and the scent of incense hung heavy in the air. The church was quiet, almost reverent, as though the entire town had come to pay homage to something unseen. Emma stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She walked down the aisle, her eyes scanning the pews. At the altar, there was a large, ornate stone basin, its surface covered in carvings that Emma couldn't quite make out from where she stood. The basin looked ancient, like it had been there for centuries. And there, standing beside it, was a figure in a dark robe, Father Elias, the town's priest. Father Elias was an older man, with a long, white beard and deep-set eyes that seemed to pierce through you. He had always been a quiet presence in the town, never speaking much to outsiders, but he had been a constant figure at every festival, every harvest. Emma had never spoken to him directly, but she knew that he was an important part of the town's rituals. He was the one who led the ceremonies, who blessed the crops and the people. But today he was different. His eyes were wide, his movements jerky, as though he were nervous, or perhaps afraid. Emma felt a chill crawl up her spine as she approached the altar. "Father Elias?" she called out softly. The priest turned to face her, his eyes widening in surprise. "Ah, Miss Emma, you've come to witness the festival, I see." Emma nodded, but her gaze was fixed on the stone basin. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What is this basin for?" Father Elias hesitated, his eyes flickering to the basin and then back to Emma. "It is for the offering, of course," he said, his voice strained. "The town's tradition. The harvest god demands it. We must give our thanks, our gratitude." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of his words, the hidden meaning behind them. The offering, the sacrifice, she whispered. Father Elias's face tightened, and he took a step closer to her. "You shouldn't speak of such things, Miss Emma. It is not for outsiders to understand. The town has been doing this for generations. We do it because we must, to survive, to keep the land fertile." Emma's mind raced. She had to stop this. But how? She was just one person, and the town was so deeply entrenched in the ritual. The harvest god was a force that had been worshipped for centuries, and Emma knew that breaking the cycle would take more than just words. "Father Elias," she said, her voice firm, "who will be chosen this year? Who is the offering?" Father Elias's expression faltered for a moment, and Emma saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. He looked around the church as if to make sure no one was listening. Then, in a low voice, he said, "It is not for me to say. The harvest god chooses, not the priest. We merely carry out the will of the land." Emma felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The harvest god, the being that demanded blood every year, ensuring the town's prosperity. But who would it be this time? And how could she stop it? The festival reached its peak as night fell. The entire town gathered in the square, where a large bonfire had been lit, casting an eerie glow on the faces of the people. Music filled the air, and the smell of roasting meats and sweet pies was thick in the night. The townspeople danced around the fire, their movements slow and hypnotic, as if they were caught in some ancient, primal rhythm. Emma stood at the edge of the crowd, her heart pounding in her chest. She had learned all she could from the church, but the more she uncovered, the more she realized how deep the town's ritual ran. The offering, the harvest god, the blood, they were all part of something that had been happening for centuries, something that no one in Ashbrook dared question. But Emma couldn't stand by and watch it happen again. She had to stop the sacrifice. She had to save whoever was chosen this year. As the night wore on, Emma's eyes scanned the crowd, looking for any sign of the chosen one. She didn't know how the selection worked, but she knew that it would happen tonight. The town was preparing for it. The air felt thick with anticipation, as if everyone knew what was about to unfold, but no one dared speak of it. Then she saw Lily, the young woman who had been helping Maggie around the house. Lily was standing near the bonfire, her face flushed with excitement. Emma's stomach dropped. She had seen Lily earlier in the day, and there had been something about her that had made Emma uneasy. Lily was kind, but there was an almost otherworldly calm about her, a sense that she belonged to the town in a way that Emma could never understand. And then it hit her. Lily was the one who would be chosen. The bonfire crackled and popped, sending sparks into the air like fleeting stars. The townspeople danced in a circle around it, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. The music was slow, hypnotic, and Emma felt her pulse quicken as she watched Lily, standing near the fire, her expression serene, almost as if she were in a trance. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She had to act now. She couldn't let the town's dark tradition continue. She had to save Lily. But how? The ritual was already beginning, and the townspeople were too absorbed in their dance to notice her moving through the crowd. She pushed past the people, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The air felt thick, oppressive, and every step she took seemed to make the ground beneath her feet heavier. She reached Lily just as the music reached a slow crescendo, and the circle around the fire began to close in tighter. The townspeople's movements became more synchronized, more purposeful. Lily stood at the center of the circle now, her eyes closed, her face calm. Emma could see the faintest trace of fear in her eyes, but it was buried beneath a mask of acceptance, as if she had already resigned herself to her fate. "Lily," Emma called out, grabbing her arm. "You don't have to do this. You don't have to be the offering." Lily's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, she seemed confused, as if she hadn't fully recognized Emma. But then, as the music swelled again, her expression softened, and a faint smile tugged at her lips. "I have to," she whispered, her voice distant. "It's the way things are. The harvest god demands it. We all must give our lives to ensure the land stays fertile." Emma shook her head, her hands trembling as she gripped Lily's arm tighter. "No, there's another way. There has to be another way. You don't have to die." But Lily only smiled again, a sad, knowing smile. "It's not about me. It's about the town. It's about everyone. If I don't do this, we'll all suffer. The land will turn barren, and the crops will fail. You don't understand, Emma. It's the way of things. It's the price we pay." The crowd around them had begun to chant, their voices low and rhythmic, like a prayer. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer, swallowing up the firelight. The ground beneath Emma's feet seemed to hum with an unnatural energy, as if the earth itself was alive, waiting for the sacrifice to be made. Emma's mind raced. She couldn't just stand by and let Lily die. She couldn't let the harvest god claim another soul. But what could she do? The townspeople were too far gone in their belief, too entrenched in the ritual. And Father Elias, who had been the one to lead them, was now standing at the altar, his eyes closed in prayer, his hands raised toward the sky. Emma's eyes darted around the circle, searching for something, anything, that could stop this. And then she saw it. Near the edge of the crowd, hidden in the shadows, was the stone basin that Father Elias had shown her earlier in the church. It stood there, cold and ominous, its surface covered in strange symbols. The very same basin that had been used for the offering in the past. Without thinking, Emma grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her toward the edge of the circle. "We need to get away from here," Emma urged, her voice frantic. "We can stop this. We can stop the harvest god." Lily resisted, her body stiffening as if she were caught in some invisible force. "It's too late," she whispered. "The offering must be made. We have no choice." But Emma wasn't giving up. She pulled harder, dragging Lily toward the stone basin. The crowd didn't seem to notice at first, their chants growing louder, more fervent. The fire blazed higher, and the shadows around them deepened. Father Elias opened his eyes and saw them moving toward the basin. His expression faltered for just a moment, and then his gaze hardened. "Stop," he shouted, his voice booming over the music. "You cannot interfere with the will of the harvest god." Emma didn't stop. She couldn't. He reached the stone basin and pushed Lily to the ground beside it. "We're not doing this. We're not letting this happen." But as she turned to face the crowd, the ground beneath her feet trembled. The earth seemed to shift, and the air grew colder still. The fire flickered, casting strange, twisting shadows that seemed to dance in time with the chanting. The townspeople were no longer just dancing. They were moving toward them, their eyes wide and glazed, their faces twisted in a look of fervent devotion. The chanting grew louder, more insistent, until it became a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. Emma's skin prickled with fear as the townspeople circled around her and Lily, their eyes fixed on them, unblinking. Father Elias stepped forward, his hands still raised in prayer. "You cannot stop this," he said, his voice cold and commanding. "The harvest god will take what is owed. It is the price of prosperity. It is the price of life." Emma's heart raced as the ground beneath them trembled again. The earth seemed to pulse, as if something deep within it was awakening. And then, from the shadows, something emerged. A figure, tall and dark, cloaked in shadow, with eyes that burned like molten gold. It was the harvest god, or something that resembled it. Its form was indistinct, as though it were made of shifting darkness, but its presence was undeniable. The air grew thick with its power, and the chanting of the townspeople grew louder, as if they were calling out to the entity. Lily fell to her knees, her eyes wide with terror and reverence. "It's here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The harvest god is here." Emma backed away, her mind racing. This wasn't just a ritual. This wasn't just a sacrifice. The harvest god was real. It was a force of nature, a creature of the earth, and it demanded blood to sustain the land. The townspeople weren't just performing a ritual. They were serving a god, a being that had existed long before they had arrived in Ashbrook. But Emma wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She had to stop this. She had to find a way to break the cycle. She turned to the stone basin, her mind working frantically. There had to be some way to disrupt the ritual, to sever the bond between the harvest god and the town. And then, as she looked at the strange symbols carved into the stone, something clicked. The symbols weren't just random markings. They were a seal, a binding spell, a way to contain the power of the harvest god. Emma had seen something like it in the book she had found in the library, The Old Records, The History of the Town. The seal was meant to keep the harvest god bound to the land, to ensure the ritual would continue. If she could break the seal, maybe she could break the cycle. Maybe she could free the town from its curse. But how? The harvest god loomed before them, its form a shifting mass of darkness, its golden eyes burning like molten embers. The air grew heavy with its presence, suffocating, as if the very earth itself was holding its breath. The townspeople stood in a trance, their eyes wide and unblinking, their bodies swaying in rhythm with the chanting. They were no longer individuals. They were a collective, bound to the will of the harvest god, slaves to the ancient ritual that had been passed down through generations. Emma felt a surge of fear, but it was quickly replaced by determination. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't let the harvest god claim another soul. Not Lily. Not anyone. She turned to the stone basin, her eyes scanning the symbols etched into its surface. They were intricate, winding patterns that seemed to pulse with a life of their own, as if they were alive, feeding on the energy of the ritual. The seal, she was certain of it now, was the key. It was the binding spell that held the harvest god to the land, ensuring the cycle of sacrifice continued. But how could she break it? The seal was ancient, and the power that held it in place was vast. Emma's mind raced, her thoughts a blur. She had to find a way to disrupt the flow of power, to sever the connection between the harvest god and the land. Then, a memory flashed in her mind, a fragment of something she had read in the old books at the library. A ritual, a counter-ritual, designed to break the bond between the god and the land. It was a dangerous and ancient spell, one that required a great sacrifice of its own. But Emma knew that if she didn't act now, Lily would be lost, and the town would be forever bound to the harvest god's will. Her heart raced as she approached the basin, her fingers trembling as they traced the symbols carved into the stone. The chanting around her grew louder, more frantic, as if the townspeople could sense the shift in the air. They were no longer dancing. They were watching, waiting for the sacrifice to be made. Father Elias stepped forward, his eyes locked onto Emma with a mixture of fear and anger. "You cannot stop this," he growled, his voice low and menacing. "The harvest god will not be denied. You cannot break the seal." Emma didn't look at him. She focused on the symbols, her mind racing. She had to find the right one, the one that would break the bond. Her fingers moved over the stone, tracing the lines until she found it, a symbol in the center of the basin, different from the others. It was a circle, surrounded by jagged lines, as if it were meant to be broken. She placed her hand over the symbol, and the ground beneath her feet trembled. A low, guttural growl echoed from the darkness, and the harvest god's form flickered, as if it were about to collapse in on itself. Emma's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't pull away. She pressed harder, her hand burning with the heat of the god's power. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the chanting. "I have to stop this." The ground shook again, this time with more force. The fire at the center of the circle flickered and sputtered, casting strange, elongated shadows across the faces of the townspeople. The chanting grew louder, more insistent, as if the very earth itself was calling out for the sacrifice to be made. Emma's fingers dug into the stone, and she closed her eyes, summoning all the strength she had left. She had to break the seal. She had to end this. And then, with a final surge of energy, she pressed down on the symbol. The world seemed to stop. The ground beneath her feet cracked open with a deafening roar, and the air was filled with the sound of something tearing, something ancient and powerful. The harvest god howled, its form flickering and distorting as if it were being pulled apart. The townspeople screamed, their bodies jerking violently as the connection between them and the god was severed. The fire at the center of the circle exploded outward, sending a wave of heat and light through the crowd. Lily cried out, her body convulsing as if she were caught in the grip of something unseen. Emma reached out, grabbing her arm, pulling her away from the basin. The townspeople were falling to the ground, writhing in pain, their eyes wide with terror as the power of the harvest god ripped through them. Father Elias staggered back, his hands clutching his chest as if he were being torn apart from the inside. "No," he screamed, his voice raw with desperation. "You cannot undo it. The land will wither. The crops will die. We will all die without the harvest god." But Emma didn't listen. She pulled Lily away from the basin, her heart racing. The ground continued to tremble beneath them, but the air was clearing. The oppressive weight of the harvest god's presence was lifting slowly but surely. And then, as suddenly as it had started, everything went still. The fire at the center of the circle burned brightly for a moment longer, then flickered out, leaving only the cold, empty night. The townspeople lay on the ground, panting and trembling, their faces pale and drawn. The harvest god was gone. The ritual had been broken. Emma stood in the center of the circle, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked down at Lily, who was still kneeling on the ground, her eyes wide with shock. The young woman's face was pale, but there was a look of relief in her eyes, as if she had been freed from something terrible. "Are you okay?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. Lily nodded slowly, her eyes still unfocused. I think it's over," she whispered. "I think we're free." Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she looked around at the fallen townspeople. They were alive, but they were broken. The ritual had been so deeply ingrained in them, so much a part of their lives, that they would never be the same. They had been freed from the harvest god's grip, but the cost of their freedom would be high. Father Elias was on the ground, his body racked with spasms. His eyes were wide with horror as he looked up at Emma, his mouth moving in silent words. He had been the priest, the one who had led the town in worship of the harvest god, and now he was nothing more than a broken man. Emma felt a pang of pity for him, but it was quickly replaced by a deep sense of sorrow. The town would never be the same. The ritual had been broken, but the damage it had caused was deep, and the road to recovery would be long. She turned to Lily, her heart heavy. "We need to get out of here," she said softly. "We need to leave this place behind." Lily nodded, her face still pale but resolute. "I don't think I can stay here anymore. Not after what we've seen." Emma took her hand, and together, they turned away from the ruins of the ritual. The town of Ashbrook had been freed from the grip of the harvest god, but its scars would remain. And for Emma, the journey was far from over. There were still many questions left unanswered, many truths still buried in the darkness. But for now, at least, they were free. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a pale, silvery light over the town of Ashbrook. The fire had long since burned out, leaving only the faint scent of smoke in the air. The ruins of the ritual circle were now nothing more than a ring of scorched earth, the remnants of a tradition that had bound the town to the harvest god for centuries. Emma and Lily stood at the edge of the clearing, staring at the town beyond. The streets were quiet now, the usual hum of life absent. The townspeople had retreated into their homes, shaken, broken, and confused by what had just happened. The once thriving town now seemed like a ghost of its former self, a place haunted by its past. Lily shivered beside her, and Emma could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them both. They had done it. They had broken the cycle. The harvest god was gone, but the price of freedom had been steep. "Do you think they'll ever be the same?" Lily asked quietly, her voice barely more than a whisper. Emma shook her head. "I don't know. They've been living under the shadow of that god for so long. I don't know if they can ever truly escape it. The belief runs so deep in them." Lily nodded, her gaze distant. "I never realized how much it controlled us, how much it controlled me." Emma placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You were just part of the cycle. You didn't have a choice. None of you did." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their actions settling in. It was hard to find peace after everything that had happened. The town had been freed, but at what cost? The people had been forced to confront a truth they had long buried, and now they had to rebuild, not just their homes, but their very way of life. "Do you think they'll understand?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. "Do you think they'll forgive me for what I almost did?" Emma squeezed her shoulder gently. "They will. It's not your fault. You were a victim, just like everyone else." Lily didn't respond, but Emma could see the doubt lingering in her eyes. The weight of the past was hard to shake, and it would take time. Time for the townspeople to heal, and time for Lily to forgive herself. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps broke the silence. Emma turned to see Father Elias stumbling toward them, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked like a man who had been drained of all his strength, and Emma could see the weight of his actions bearing down on him. "You," Father Elias croaked, his voice hoarse. "You broke it. You broke the seal." Emma didn't speak at first. She simply watched him, her heart heavy. He had been the one to lead the town in its worship of the harvest god. He had been the one to ensure the rituals continued year after year. He had been the one who had forced Lily into becoming the offering. And now, he was nothing more than a broken man, stripped of his power. "I had no choice," Father Elias continued, his voice trembling. I thought I was doing the right thing. The harvest god. It was the only way to ensure the town's survival. The crops, the land, it all depended on it." Emma felt a pang of sorrow for him, but it was quickly overshadowed by the anger that had been building inside her since the moment she first learned of the ritual. You didn't have to do it. You didn't have to sacrifice people to keep the land fertile. You could have found another way. Father Elias lowered his gaze, his shoulders slumping. "I didn't know any other way. The town. It's all we've ever known. The harvest god. It was part of us. I thought if we stopped, everything would fall apart." Emma shook her head. "The land doesn't need a god to survive. It needs care. It needs attention, but it doesn't need to be fed with blood." Father Elias looked up at her, his eyes filled with remorse. I understand that now, but it's too late. I've already led my people down this path. I've already condemned them." Lily stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "You didn't condemn anyone. You were a victim too, just like the rest of us." Father Elias's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, Emma saw a glimpse of the man he once had been, before the rituals, before the harvest god. He was just a man broken by his own beliefs. "I failed them," he whispered. "I failed all of you." Emma didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much pain he had caused, how many lives he had ruined. But another part of her understood. He had been a prisoner of the town's traditions, just like everyone else. "We'll help them," Emma said quietly. "We'll help you rebuild, but it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of time." Father Elias nodded, his face drawn with sorrow. "I'll do whatever it takes to make amends. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'll try." The three of them stood there for a moment longer, the weight of the past pressing down on them. The town of Ashbrook had been freed from the harvest god's grip, but the scars of its past would take time to heal. The days that followed were difficult, as the town of Ashbrook began to pick up the pieces of its shattered existence. The people were shaken, confused, and terrified of what the future might hold. The rituals had been a part of their lives for so long that they didn't know how to function without them. Emma and Lily stayed in Ashbrook, helping the townspeople as best they could. They offered comfort to those who were struggling, and they worked with Father Elias to help the town rebuild. The first few weeks were the hardest. The crops were withering, the land seemed barren, and there was a palpable sense of fear in the air. The harvest god's absence had left a void, and no one knew how to fill it. But Emma was determined to help. She had seen what the town could become, what it could be without the dark shadow of the harvest god hanging over it. She had to believe that there was a way forward. They just needed time. Slowly, the town began to heal. The crops started to grow again, albeit slowly. The people found new ways to farm, new methods of ensuring their survival. The rituals were gone, replaced by hard work and community. And as for Emma and Lily, they found a new sense of purpose in the town. They had freed Ashbrook from its past, and now they were helping to build a future, one where the land would thrive without the need for sacrifice. It wasn't easy. It never would be. But they had broken the cycle, and that was the first step toward true freedom. The sun rose slowly over Ashbrook, casting a warm, golden light over the town that had seen so much darkness. The streets, once silent and heavy with fear, were now filled with the sounds of life. Children laughing, neighbors speaking in hushed voices, and the soft rustling of the wind through the trees. It was a new day, and the town was slowly finding its way back to something resembling normalcy. Emma stood at the edge of the town, overlooking the fields that stretched out beyond the homes. The land was still recovering, the soil rich with promise, but also scarred by years of neglect. The crops had started to grow again, but it would take time for the land to fully heal. It was a fragile balance, one that required patience, care, and dedication. But for the first time in a long while, Emma felt a glimmer of hope. Lily stood beside her, her eyes scanning the horizon. She had changed in the weeks since the ritual was broken. The haunted look that had once clouded her eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet strength. She was no longer the girl who had been chosen to be a sacrifice. She was free, truly free. "Do you think it will ever be the same?" Lily asked, her voice thoughtful as she turned to Emma. "Do you think the town will ever forget what happened?" Emma hesitated before answering. "No, I don't think they can forget. They've been through too much. But maybe they don't have to forget. Maybe they just need to learn how to live without it. Without the rituals, without the god. They need to rebuild, not just the land, but themselves." Lily nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the distant hills. "I've been thinking a lot about that. About what comes next. I don't know how to live in a world without the harvest god. It's all I've ever known." Emma smiled softly, placing a hand on Lily's shoulder. "You'll figure it out. We all will. We have to. And we're not alone in this. We got each other, and the town is each other. That's what matters now." Lily smiled faintly, the weight of her past slowly lifting. "I hope so." Just then, Father Elias appeared, walking slowly toward them. His steps were heavy, burdened by the weight of his past actions. But there was a glimmer of something else in his eyes. Regret, yes, but also a sense of purpose. He had been working alongside the townspeople, helping to restore the fields and rebuild what had been broken. "I've been thinking," Father Elias said, his voice quiet but steady, "about what we can do to help the land, to help the town. We've tried everything, every ritual, every offering, but I think it's time to try something different." Emma and Lily turned to him, waiting for him to continue. "I've been speaking with some of the elders," Father Elias said, "and we think it's time to plant a new kind of seed. Not just in the soil, but in the hearts of the people. A seed of hope, of renewal. A way to heal the land, not through sacrifice, but through care." Emma's heart swelled with a sense of relief. "What do you mean?" Father Elias smiled, though it was a sad, weary smile. "We need to teach the people how to work with the land, not take from it. We need to show them that the earth doesn't need blood to thrive. It needs love, patience, and respect. We'll plant crops, yes, but we'll also plant new ideas, new traditions." Lily looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "And what about the old ways? The rituals? The God?" "They're gone," Father Elias said, his voice firm. "They're part of the past now. We can't change what's been done, but we can change what comes next. We can build a future where the land thrives on its own, without needing to feed on human lives." Emma felt a weight lift from her chest. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be setbacks, challenges, and doubt along the way. But this was a beginning, a chance for something new. "We'll need help," Lily said, her voice steady. "We can't do this alone." "We won't be alone," Father Elias replied. "The town will come together. We'll rebuild not just the land, but our lives. It will take time, but it's the only way forward." Emma nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. "Then let's get started." The following weeks were filled with hard work. Emma, Lily, and Father Elias worked alongside the townspeople to restore the field, plant new crops, and build new homes. The old rituals were slowly forgotten, replaced by a new sense of community, one where the people of Ashbrook worked together to heal the land. The land itself responded slowly but surely. The crops began to grow, though at first they were small and fragile. But with each passing day, they became stronger, more vibrant. The earth was healing just as the people were. It wasn't perfect, and there were still struggles ahead, but it was a start. One afternoon, as Emma and Lily walked through the field, the sun setting behind them, Lily turned to Emma with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, "I think we're going to be okay." Emma smiled, her heart light. "I think so too." The seasons passed, and Ashbrook began to flourish once more. The crops grew tall and strong, the fields filled with life. The people found new ways to honor the land, not through sacrifice, but through gratitude. They no longer feared the harvest god. They had learned that the land didn't need a god to thrive. It only needed care, respect, and the will to work together. Emma and Lily remained in Ashbrook, helping the town rebuild and grow. They had both found new purposes, Emma as a guide, helping the town navigate its new life, and Lily as a leader, helping the people understand the importance of their connection to the land. And though the past would always linger in the shadows, it no longer held the town in its grip. The cycle of sacrifice had been broken, and Ashbrook was free. Years passed, and Ashbrook grew into a thriving community once again. The fields were full, the people were strong, and the land was rich with promise. The old rituals had been forgotten, replaced by new traditions, ones that celebrated life, not death. The harvest god was no more, a distant memory, a story told to children as a warning of the dangers of blind faith. Emma and Lily, now older and wiser, stood at the edge of the town one last time, watching the sun set over the fields. The land was thriving, the crops abundant, and the people at peace. "We did it," Lily said softly, her voice filled with quiet pride. Emma nodded, her heart full. "We did." And as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, they knew that Ashbrook's future was no longer bound to the past. It was free, and so were they. It had been years since the harvest god was banished from Ashbrook, and life had settled into a rhythm that was, for the most part, peaceful. The crops grew in abundance, the people worked together, and the town flourished. Emma and Lily had become pillars of the community, their bond unbreakable as they guided Ashbrook toward a future free from the shadows of the past. But even in the quietest moments, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. It was a nagging thought, a whisper in the back of her mind that refused to be ignored. She had seen the scars left by the harvest god's rain, how deep the town's roots had run in its power, how much the people had depended on it. It was a part of them, and while they had moved on, Emma couldn't help but wonder if it was truly over. One late afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Emma and Lily stood in the town square, overseeing the preparations for the harvest festival. The air was thick with the scent of freshly baked bread and the sound of children's laughter. It should have been a moment of celebration, but Emma's unease lingered. Do you feel it? Emma asked, her voice low. Lily glanced at her, a frown creasing her brow. Feel what? That something's not right. Like there's a storm brewing, but we don't see it yet. Lily studied her for a moment, then shook her head. I don't know, Emma. I think we've just been through so much. It's hard to let go of the fear. Maybe you're just still processing everything we've been through. Emma nodded, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. There was something lurking just beneath the surface, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Later that evening, after the town had settled into sleep, Emma was unable to rest. She wandered through the quiet streets, the moonlight casting long shadows across the ground. Her thoughts were restless, and she found herself walking toward the edge of the woods, the place where the ritual circle had once stood. As she approached the clearing, she noticed something strange. air felt colder. The trees around her seemed to whisper in the wind, and the earth beneath her feet felt wrong. The soil was cracked, as if something had been buried there long ago, and the faintest trace of an old symbol seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. Emma knelt down, her heart racing as she traced the shape with her fingers. It was a symbol she recognized, one that had been carved into the stone altar where the sacrifices had once been made. A chilling realization washed over her. The ritual circle had been destroyed, but the land still carried the mark of its dark history. Suddenly, a rustling sound behind her made her freeze. She whipped around, her breath catching in her throat. Emerging from the shadows were figures cloaked in dark robes, their faces hidden beneath hoods. They moved with purpose, as if they had been waiting for her. Emma Wren. One of them spoke, his voice deep and unrecognizable. "You have no idea what you've done." Emma's pulse quickened, and she instinctively took a step back. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. "What do you want?" The figure stepped forward, and Emma could see the faintest outline of his face beneath the hood. He was older than she expected, his eyes dark and cold. "We are the keepers of the old ways," he said, his voice filled with venom. "And you have undone everything we've worked for." Emma's mind raced. Keepers of the old ways? The words echoed in her mind like a warning bell. Could it be possible that there were others, survivors of the old rituals, who still believed in the harvest god, who still wanted to see the town return to its dark past? "You're fools," Emma spat, her voice filled with defiance. "The harvest god is gone. The rituals are over. We broke the cycle. You can't bring it back." The figure's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Oh, but we can. The harvest god's power is not so easily destroyed. You may have broken the circle, but the blood still calls to us. The land still hungers, and we are here to feed it." Before Emma could react, the figure raised his hand, and the air around her seemed to grow thick with an unnatural force. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and a low, guttural growl seemed to echo from deep within the earth. She staggered back, her heart pounding in her chest. "Run, Emma," a voice called from behind her. It was Lily, rushing toward her with wide eyes filled with fear. Emma didn't need to be told twice. She turned and ran, Lily close behind her, as the figures in the clearing began to chant in a language Emma didn't recognize. The sound was like a dark melody, a hymn to something ancient and terrifying. As they reached the edge of the woods, Emma glanced back, her breath ragged. The figures had not followed them, but the ground still trembled, and the air was thick with an oppressive weight. The harvest god's influence was returning, and it was stronger than ever. The following morning, Emma and Lily gathered the town's leaders in the town hall, their faces grim as they recounted the events of the night. Father Elias, now a man of peace and reflection, sat at the head of the table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. His face was pale, his eyes filled with regret. "They're back," Emma said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "A group of people calling themselves the keepers of the old ways. They want to revive the rituals. They want to bring the harvest god back." Father Elias's face hardened. "I should have known," he muttered, his voice heavy with guilt. "There are always those who will try to bring back the old ways. They never truly leave." Lily clenched her fists at her side. "We can't let them do this. We can't let Ashbrook fall back into that nightmare." "We won't," Emma said firmly. "We've already broken the cycle once. We could do it again, but this time, we need to act quickly." The room fell silent as everyone exchanged looks of fear and determination. They all knew that the harvest god's influence had been banished once, but it had never truly disappeared. It was like a dark seed buried deep in the earth, waiting for the right moment to sprout. "We need to find them," Emma continued. "We need to stop them before they can complete whatever ritual they're planning. And we need to make sure they don't turn the land against us again." Father Elias nodded slowly. "I'll gather the townspeople. We'll stand together, as we did before. But we must be careful. The power they wield is not something we can face lightly." Emma's heart sank, but she didn't hesitate. The past was returning, and they would have to face it head on. There would be no running from it. No more hiding. "We'll do whatever it takes," Emma said. "Ashbrook is our home, and we will protect it." The days following the discovery of the Keeper's presence were filled with tension. Ashbrook, which had once been a place of healing and renewal, now found itself on the brink of disaster once again. Emma, Lily, and Father Elias worked tirelessly to prepare for what was coming, but there was an unsettling sense of inevitability in the air. The Keepers had waited too long, and they were ready to bring the harvest god back. Emma paced back and forth in the town hall, her mind racing. The Keepers were not just a group of misguided souls. They were dedicated, and they had knowledge of the old rituals. Emma knew they would stop at nothing to see their dark god return. But what could they do? They had already broken the circle once. But the forces at play now seemed far more powerful than anything they had faced before. "We need to find them before they can complete the ritual," Emma said, her voice tight with urgency. "We need to know where they're gathering and what they're planning." Father Elias nodded, his brow furrowed. "I've spoken with some of the elders. They believe the Keepers will try to perform the ritual at the old altar, the one where the sacrifices were made. It's the only place where the power of the harvest god can be fully revived." Lily, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up. "Then we need to get there first. We can't let them complete the ritual. If they do, it will be too late." Emma's heart raced as she considered their options. The old altar was deep in the woods, hidden away from the rest of the town. It was a place of power, a place where the land itself seemed to bend to the will of the harvest god. He had seen it once, and she knew that the very air around it had felt alive with dark energy. "We'll need a plan," Emma said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "We can't just walk in there and expect to defeat them. They'll be prepared." Father Elias stood, his hands trembling slightly. "We'll need to gather our strongest. We'll need to be ready for anything." The town gathered quickly, the urgency of the situation clear to everyone. Emma, Lily, Father Elias, and a small group of trusted townspeople set out toward the woods at dawn. As they walked through the familiar streets, Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of dread settle over her. The Harvest God's influence had once been all-encompassing, and now it was returning. Would they be able to stop it? The journey to the altar was long and treacherous. The path through the woods was thick with underbrush, and the deeper they went, the more the air seemed to change. The birds fell silent, and the trees loomed overhead like silent sentinels. It was as though the land itself was holding its breath. When they finally reached the clearing, the sight that greeted them was enough to stop Emma in her tracks. The altar, once a place of death and sacrifice, now pulsed with an eerie light. The keepers were gathered around it, their robes dark and flowing, their faces hidden beneath hoods. They were chanting in a language Emma didn't understand, their voices rising and falling in a rhythmic pattern that seemed to echo through the very earth. Emma's heart sank. They were too late. The ritual was already in motion. "We have to stop them," Lily whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Emma nodded. "But we can't just charge in. We need to be strategic." Father Elias stepped forward, his face grim. "I'll approach them. I know some of their leaders. If I can speak to them, I may be able to convince them to stop." "Are you sure?" Emma asked, her concern evident. "They've already shown how far they'll go to bring back the harvest god. I'm not sure words will be enough." Father Elias hesitated, then nodded. "It's worth a try, but if it comes to it, we'll have to fight." The group split into smaller factions, each one taking a different position around the clearing. Emma and Lily stayed hidden behind a cluster of trees, watching as Father Elias slowly approached the keepers. His steps were deliberate, his posture calm, but Emma could see the tension in his shoulders. The chanting grew louder, and the energy in the air seemed to intensify. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and Emma felt a coldness seep into her bones. The harvest god was waking. She could feel it, a dark presence stirring beneath the earth, calling to the keepers. Father Elias reached the circle of keepers, and for a moment there was silence. The chanting stopped, and the air hung heavy with anticipation. Emma held her breath, watching intently. One of the keepers, the leader Emma assumed, stepped forward. His voice was cold and mocking as he addressed Father Elias. "You think you can stop us? You think you can undo what has already begun?" Father Elias's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "I know what you're trying to do, but you cannot bring back the harvest god. It is over. The land no longer needs its blood." The leader laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the clearing. "You are a fool, Father Elias. The land will always hunger. The power of the harvest god is eternal. You cannot stop it." Emma's heart pounded as she watched the exchange. This was at the moment of truth. Would Father Elias be able to reason with them? Or would the town be plunged back into the nightmare they had fought so hard to escape? But before Father Elias could respond, a deep, guttural growl rumbled from the altar. The ground shook violently, and the trees around them began to sway as if caught in a storm. The harvest god was awakening, its power rising with every passing second. Father Elias stepped back, his face pale with realization. "It's too late," he whispered. The keepers raised their hands, their chants growing louder, more frenzied. The altar began to glow with an unholy light, and the earth itself seemed to split open, revealing a dark, swirling mass beneath the surface. The harvest god was rising, and there was no stopping it now. Emma felt a cold chill run through her body as the ground beneath her feet cracked open. The harvest god's power surged upward, and with it came a wave of darkness, a force so strong it felt like it could consume everything in its path. "We need to fight back," Lily shouted, her voice filled with fear and determination. Emma nodded, her eyes scanning the clearing for any way to stop the ritual. They had to act fast before the harvest god fully returned. The ground beneath Emma's feet cracked open with a deafening roar, sending a shockwave through the clearing. The earth groaned as though it were alive, a living, breathing thing. The altar at the center of the clearing pulsed with a sickly, greenish glow, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with an unnatural energy. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as the dark force beneath the earth surged upward. The harvest god was rising, and there was no turning back now. "We need to stop them," Lily shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos. Emma nodded, but her mind raced. They had no time to waste. The keepers were focused on the altar, their chants growing louder and more frenzied. Father Elias stood at the edge of the circle, trying to reason with them, but the leader of the keepers, his face twisted in a cruel grin, was unmoved. The harvest god's power had already begun to manifest, and there was no stopping it now. "We need to break the ritual," Emma said, her voice firm. "We have to destroy the altar before the harvest god fully awakens." Lily's eyes widened with realization. "But how?" "The altar is the source of the power. If we destroy it, we'll be destroying the very thing that holds the god's power. Won't that kill us all?" Emma hesitated, the weight of the decision heavy on her shoulders. She knew that destroying the altar would come with a terrible cost. But if they didn't, Ashbrook would be consumed by the harvest god's return. The town, the people, everything they had fought for, it would all be lost. "We don't have a choice," Emma said, her voice resolute. "We either stop the ritual, or we lose everything." Lily nodded, her face pale but determined. "Then let's do it." The two women moved swiftly, darting between the trees and approaching the altar from the rear. The keepers were too absorbed in their chanting to notice them. Emma could feel the energy in the air, thick and oppressive, as though the very fabric of reality was warping around them. Father Elias, seeing that the ritual was beyond words, began to move toward the altar as well, his hands trembling. "We must act now," he said under his breath. Emma and Lily reached the altar, and Emma placed her hands on the stone surface. It was warm to the touch, pulsing with dark energy. The power radiated from it like a living thing, and Emma could feel it thrumming beneath her fingertips. The harvest god was awake, its presence filling the clearing like a storm. "We need something to break the bond," Lily said, her voice tight with fear. Emma glanced around, searching for anything that could help. Her eyes fell on the ancient dagger that had once been used for sacrifices, the same one that had been used in the ritual to summon the harvest god. It lay discarded on the ground, its blade gleaming in the dim light. "I have an idea," Emma said, her heart racing. She grabbed the dagger and turned to Lily. "We'll use this to sever the connection between the altar and the harvest god. It's the only way." Lily hesitated, her eyes flickering with doubt. "But if we fail, we won't fail," Emma said firmly. "We have no other choice." With a deep breath, Emma raised the dagger above her head and plunged it into the altar. The moment the blade made contact, a violent surge of energy shot through her, knocking her back. With the force of 1,000 storms, the ground beneath her feet cracked open, and a deafening roar filled the air. The keepers stopped chanting, their heads snapping toward Emma and Lily. The leader's face twisted in fury. "You fool," he screamed. "You don't understand what you've done." But it was too late. The dagger had pierced the altar, severing the connection between the harvest god and the ritual. The power that had once flowed through the altar began to dissipate, and the earth itself seemed to recoil in pain. The sky above them darkened, and a wind began to howl through the trees, as if the very world were protesting the loss of its dark god. The harvest god's form began to fade, its massive, shadowy shape flickering in and out of existence. The keepers screamed in rage and terror as they tried to maintain the ritual, but it was no use. The god was slipping away, its power unraveling like a broken thread. Emma could feel the weight of the ritual lifting, the oppressive energy slowly fading from the air. But the ground still trembled, and the earth beneath them continued to crack open, as though the god's influence had not been fully banished. "We need to finish this," Emma gasped, her breath coming in ragged bursts, "before it's too late." Lily nodded, her face pale but determined. "What do we do now?" Emma looked at the altar, the dagger still lodged in its stone surface. "We need to destroy it completely. We need to sever the last of the god's power." But as they prepared to strike again, the leader of the keepers lunged at them, his eyes wild with fury. "You cannot destroy what is eternal," he screamed, his hands outstretched toward the altar. Father Elias, who had been watching from the edge of the clearing, rushed forward. He tackled the keeper to the ground, knocking him away from the altar. The other keepers tried to intervene, but they were no match for the combined strength of the townspeople, who had been quietly gathering in the woods, waiting for the right moment to strike. The battle was chaotic, a blur of movement and shouting. The keepers fought desperately to protect the altar, but they were outnumbered. Emma and Lily, seeing the opening, turned back to the altar, their hearts pounding. Together, they raised the dagger once more, and with all their strength, they drove it deep into the altar's core. A blinding light erupted from the altar, and the ground shook violently. The harvest god's form flickered once more, then disappeared entirely, its presence vanishing from the world like a dream fading at dawn. The earth fell silent. The battle was over. The keepers had been defeated, and the harvest god was gone, its influence banished from Ashbrook for good. But the cost had been high. The altar lay in ruins, its dark power scattered like ashes in the wind. The land, once tainted by the god's presence, now felt empty, hollow. Emma and Lily stood at the center of the clearing, their bodies battered and bruised from the fight. They were exhausted, but there was a sense of relief that washed over them. The darkness had been vanquished, and Ashbrook was safe once more. Father Elias approached them, his face grim but relieved. "It's over," he said quietly. "The harvest god will not return." Emma nodded, but her heart still felt heavy. "We've won," she said, her voice soft. "But at what cost? How many lives were lost to bring us here?" Lily placed a hand on her shoulder, her expression sympathetic. "We did what we had to do. Ashbrook is free. The god is gone. That's what matters." But Emma knew that the scars of the past would never truly fade. Ashbrook had been changed forever, and so had she. As the townspeople gathered around them, their faces filled with gratitude and relief, Emma realized that they had all been through something that could never be undone. The harvest god was gone, but the memory of its power would live on in their hearts, a reminder of the darkness they had overcome and the light they had found together. The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft golden glow over the clearing where the battle had taken place. The remnants of the altar were little more than shattered stones, now lying in scattered piles. The trees around the clearing, once twisted and dark with the influence of the harvest god, seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The land, though scarred, was slowly beginning to heal. Emma stood at the edge of the clearing, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her body ached, her muscles sore from the strain of the battle, but it was the emptiness inside her that hurt the most. The fight was over, but the toll it had taken on her was undeniable. She had seen things she would never forget. The faces of the fallen, the power of the god, the terror in the eyes of the keepers as they realized their fate. It was all burned into her mind, and she wasn't sure if she could ever erase it. Lily approached her, her footsteps soft on the forest floor. "Hey," she said gently, her voice warm with understanding. "You did it. We did it." Emma didn't respond immediately. She simply stared at the ruins of the altar, lost in thought. After a moment, she turned to face Lily, her eyes tired but resolute. "I don't feel like we've won. Not yet. I can't shake the feeling that something's still not right." Lily raised an eyebrow, concern flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," Emma murmured, shaking her head. "It's like there's a shadow still hanging over this place. Over me." Lily stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're still carrying the weight of everything we've been through. And I get it. I feel it too. But you're not alone in this. We all made it through. Ashbrook is safe now. That's something we can hold on to." Emma sighed, her breath heavy with exhaustion. I don't know how to move forward from this. How do you move on after something like this?" Lily gave her a small smile, her expression filled with quiet empathy. "One step at a time. That's all we can do. We survived. We'll find a way to heal together." Father Elias joined them, his face lined with weariness but also relief. "The town is starting to recover," he said, his voice steady. "People are coming together. They're beginning to understand that the worst is over." Emma nodded, but she still couldn't shake the unease in her chest. The god was gone, the keepers defeated, but something still felt unfinished. As if the battle wasn't just against the harvest god, but against something deeper, something that had been festering in the town long before the god's return. "I hope you're right," Emma said, her voice tinged with doubt. "But I can't help feeling like there's more we don't understand, like we're missing something." Father Elias gave her a long, thoughtful look. "The darkness we faced here was powerful, but it wasn't just the harvest god. It was the fear, the desperation, the willingness to sacrifice anything for power. That's what the keepers were after. And in a way, that's what they were trying to bring back. The god was only a tool for them." Emma's mind raced as she processed his words. "You think the keepers were just a symptom of something bigger?" Father Elias nodded slowly. "Yes, the darkness that took hold of Ashbrook wasn't just a result of the god's influence. It was in the people, in their hearts. The god may have been banished, but the fear that led to the creation of the keepers, the desperation that drove them to this point, it's still here." Lily's face tightened with realization. "So the real work is with the people. We have to heal the town, not just the land." Emma's gaze drifted toward the town in the distance, the houses still standing, the streets quiet and empty. The town was free from the god's influence, but the people, were they truly free? Or were they still haunted by the same fears and secrets that had allowed the darkness to take root in the first place? "We'll need to help them," Emma said softly. "We need to help everyone understand that the fear is gone, that the past doesn't have to control them anymore." Father Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm. "You're right. The work is far from over. But you've already done more than anyone could have expected. Ashbrook will heal. It may take time, but it will heal." The days following the destruction of the altar were filled with a strange sense of quiet. The town, though battered by the events that had unfolded, began to stir once more. People emerged from their homes, hesitant at first, but gradually growing more confident as the days passed. The influence of the harvest god was gone, but the scars it had left behind were not so easily erased. Emma and Lily spent their days speaking to the townspeople, helping them rebuild their lives. There was much to be done, homes to repair, crops to tend to, families to console. But the most important task was to rebuild the trust that had been shattered by the keeper's actions. The fear that had gripped Ashbrook for so long had not disappeared overnight. It lingered in the eyes of the people, in the way they looked over their shoulders, as if waiting for the darkness to return. Father Elias, too, worked tirelessly to guide the people through their recovery. He spoke often of forgiveness and redemption, reminding them that while the darkness had been defeated, they needed to confront their own shadows in order to truly move forward. But it wasn't easy. There were those who still clung to the old ways, who whispered of the harvest god's return, who feared that the god's power had merely been dormant, waiting for the right moment to rise again. Emma could see the hesitation in their eyes, the unwillingness to let go of the past. And she understood. After everything they had been through, how could they not be afraid? Still, Emma pressed on. She knew that healing would take time, but she also knew that they couldn't afford to let fear dictate their future. Ashbrook had survived the harvest god, and it would survive this too. But it would take all of them together to make it happen. Weeks passed, and Ashbrook slowly began to return to some semblance of normalcy. The crops were growing again, the town's spirit was recovering, and the people, though still haunted by the past, were learning to trust in the future. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out of place. The land was healing, yes, but she couldn't ignore the whispers she had been hearing in the dead of night, soft, distant voices that seemed to call her name. It wasn't just the remnants of the harvest god's power. It was something else, something older, something that had been buried deep within the town's history. One night, as she sat alone in her room, the whispers grew louder. They were coming from the woods. A familiar, aching pull tugged at her heart. She knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. She grabbed her jacket and stepped out into the cool night air, the moon casting a pale light over the town. She made her way toward the woods, her footsteps silent on the forest floor. The whispers led her to the clearing, to the ruins of the altar. It was quiet now, the eerie energy that had once filled the air long gone. But as Emma stood there, staring at the shattered stones, she felt a presence behind her. Turning slowly, she saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It was a man, tall and cloaked in shadow. His face was hidden, but his voice, soft and haunting, cut through the silence. "You've done well," he said, his tone almost approving. "But you cannot undo what has been done." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The figure stepped forward, his form flickering like a mirage. "I am the one who has watched over Ashbrook for centuries. I am the one who has seen the darkness grow, who has seen the gods rise and fall. And I am the one who will ensure that the harvest god is never truly gone." Emma stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as the figure in the shadows spoke. The voice was calm, almost soothing, but there was something unsettling about it, something that made her skin crawl. The air around her seemed to grow colder, as if the night itself were holding its breath. "I don't understand," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The harvest god is gone. We destroyed the altar. We stopped the ritual. What do you mean? It's not over." The figure took another step forward, and Emma instinctively took a step back. The man's face remained hidden, but there was something in his presence that was undeniably powerful. His voice, when it came again, was filled with quiet certainty. "You did what you had to do, Emma, but there are forces older than the harvest god. Forces that were here long before it ever rose from the earth. You've only scratched the surface of what lies beneath." Emma's mind raced. What could he mean? The harvest god had been the source of all the darkness, the power that had corrupted Ashbrook. He had seen it with her own eyes. He had felt the god's power as it had surged through the earth, trying to break free. It was gone now, wasn't it? "You're lying," she said more forcefully this time. "God is gone. The keepers are gone. The town is safe. We stopped it. We won." The figure tilted his head slightly, as though considering her words. "You stopped one part of the story, yes? But there are many chapters yet to be written. The harvest god was never the true enemy, Emma. It was a tool, a weapon used by those who have always sought power." "Who are you?" Emma demanded again, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and frustration. "Why are you telling me this?" The figure finally stepped into the moonlight, his face still obscured by the shadows of his hood. But there was something in his eyes, something ancient, something that sent a shiver down her spine. He wasn't human, at least not entirely. "I am the Watcher," he said, his voice resonating with an eerie, almost otherworldly quality. "I have been here since the beginning, since the first settlers came to Ashbrook. I have seen the rise and fall of many gods, and I have watched as the darkness consumed this town time and time again." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "You've been here all this time?" The Watcher nodded slowly. "Yes, I've always been here waiting. The harvest god was merely a manifestation of the fears and desires of the people. It fed on their need for control, for power over life and death. But it was not the first, and it will not be the last." Emma felt a chill run through her. "What do you want from me? Why are you telling me all of this?" "I'm telling you this because you are the key," the Watcher replied. "You, Emma, are the one who has the power to stop what is coming. The harvest god may have been banished, but the true darkness is still here. It is not a god. It is not a spirit. It is the very heart of Ashbrook itself." Emma's mind reeled. "The heart of Ashbrook? What are you talking about?" "The land," the Watcher said, his voice low and heavy. "The town itself is cursed. The darkness that has plagued it for centuries is not a single force. It is woven into the very soil, the very bones of this place. The people of Ashbrook have always been bound to it, whether they know it or not. And that bond cannot be broken by simply destroying a god." Emma's thoughts spun, her stomach churning with a mix of fear and confusion. "So, what do we do?" How do we stop it? The Watcher's eyes gleamed in the moonlight, cold and ancient. You must face the darkness at its source. You must go deeper than the altar, deeper than the rituals and the gods. You must find the wellspring of the curse and destroy it. Emma felt her blood run cold. The wellspring? Where is it? The Watcher's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. It lies beneath Ashbrook, beneath the town you call home. The roots of the curse run deep, and only by cutting them at their source can you truly rid the town of its darkness. Emma's mind was racing, the weight of his words pressing down on her. Beneath the town? Was there a hidden secret buried deep beneath Ashbrook? A secret that no one had ever known? How do I find it? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The Watcher's smile faded, replaced by a look of grave seriousness. You will need to seek the truth within yourself. The curse is tied to the history of Ashbrook, to the sins of the past. The answers lie within the town's oldest secrets. But be warned, Emma. The deeper you go, the more dangerous it will become. The darkness is not just in the land. It is in the people, in the very memories they have buried. Emma stood there, her mind spinning, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. The darkness wasn't gone. It was still there, hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. And she was the one who had to face it. How do I begin? She asked, her voice shaking. The Watcher stepped back, his form dissolving into the shadows once more. You already have, he said, his voice fading into the night. The answers are in Ashbrook. Find them, and you will find the way to end the curse. But remember this, the truth is never what it seems, and the cost of uncovering it may be more than you are willing to pay. The Watcher's words echoed in Emma's mind as she made her way back to Ashbrook. Her steps were heavy, her thoughts a whirlwind of uncertainty. Beneath the town, in the very bones of Ashbrook, lay a darkness that had been there long before the harvest god. She had thought that by defeating the god, she had saved the town. But now she knew the truth. The real battle had only just begun. As she walked through the streets of Ashbrook, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the town's history pressing down on her. The people, the buildings, the very ground beneath her feet. Everything was connected to the curse that had plagued the town for centuries. She had to find the wellspring. But where? And what would she uncover when she did? Her first instinct was to go to Father Elias. He had been a guiding force through the battle with the harvest god, and she trusted him. But even as she thought of him, a nagging doubt tugged at her. What if he, too, was tied to the curse? What if the town's history ran deeper than even he knew? Emma knew she had to be careful. She couldn't trust anyone blindly, not after everything that had happened. She would have to find the truth on her own. The night was still and quiet as she made her way toward the town's oldest building, the church. She had been there countless times, but now it felt different. The building seemed to hold secrets, its walls whispering of things long forgotten. Emma pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped inside. The church was dimly lit, the flickering candles casting long shadows across the pews. Father Elias was standing near the altar, his head bowed in silent prayer. When he heard her footsteps, he turned, his expression warm but weary. "Emma," he said, his voice soft, "I'm glad you're here. I've been thinking about everything that's happened. The harvest god is gone, but something still doesn't feel right, does it?" Emma nodded, her heart heavy. "No, it doesn't. I spoke with someone tonight. Someone who told me that the real darkness is buried beneath Ashbrook, that the curse is tied to the land itself, to the very history of this town." Father Elias's face grew pale, and for the first time, Emma saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. "Who did you speak with?" "A man," Emma said, her voice low. "He called himself the Watcher. He said the answers are buried deep beneath Ashbrook, that the curse is older than we know." Father Elias's expression hardened. "I've heard of the Watcher," he said quietly, "but I never thought he was real. I thought it was just a story. A warning." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "What do you know about him?" Father Elias took a deep breath. "The Watcher is said to be an ancient being, one who has watched over Ashbrook since its founding. Some say he is a spirit Others say he is something far worse. But one thing is certain. He knows the town's secrets. And if he's involved, then the curse is far more dangerous than we ever imagined. The air in the church felt heavier now, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Emma stood in front of Father Elias, her mind swirling with the implications of his words. The Watcher wasn't just some myth or legend. He was real, and he was connected to the curse that had plagued Ashbrook for centuries. Father Elias's face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he clasped them in front of him. "I've heard whispers," he said, his voice low, "but I never wanted to believe them. There are old stories about the Watcher, about the curse that binds Ashbrook. But they are dangerous stories, Emma. Stories that no one dares speak of." Emma's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? What stories?" Father Elias glanced around the church, as if making sure no one was listening. "The founders of Ashbrook made a pact long ago. They didn't just settle here for land or wealth. They made a deal with something ancient, something that promised them power and protection in exchange for their souls. The Watcher, or whatever he is, has been guarding that pact ever since." Emma felt a cold chill run down her spine. "So the curse, it's not just about the harvest god? It's deeper than that?" "Yes," Father Elias said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The harvest god was just one manifestation of the curse. The real power lies beneath Ashbrook. It's in the land itself. The pact the founders made. It tied them to the land, and it bound the town to something much darker than any god. The Watcher is the keeper of that secret, and now, it seems, he's come to collect." Emma felt her stomach churn. "Collect what?" Father Elias looked her in the eye, his expression grim. "The price. The price of the pact. The people of Ashbrook, for generations, have been living on borrowed time. The darkness you've fought against, the harvest god, keepers, none of it would have been possible without that pact. And now, the time has come for the Watcher to collect what was promised." A sense of dread washed over Emma. "But how does it all end? What does he want from me?" Father Elias took a step closer, his voice strained with urgency. "I don't know, Emma, but I fear that whatever the Watcher wants, it will come at a terrible cost. The town is built on this curse. It's in the very soil, the very foundations of everything here. The longer the pact is left unfulfilled, the more the land will wither. The people of Ashbrook will continue to suffer, and the darkness will only grow stronger." Emma swallowed hard, her mind racing. The battle with the harvest god had been only a fraction of the struggle. The real fight was still ahead of her, and it was one that she didn't fully understand. "We have to stop him," she said, her voice firm. "We can't let the curse continue. We can't let the Watcher win." Father Elias nodded, though his face was filled with doubt. "But how? If the Watcher is as powerful as they say, how can we stand against him?" Emma's mind raced. The Watcher had said that the answers were buried beneath Ashbrook, deep within the land itself. But what did that mean? How could she find the wellspring of the curse? And more importantly, how could she destroy it? "I don't know," Emma admitted, "but I have to try. I have to find the truth, no matter what it takes." Father Elias gave her a solemn nod. "Then I will help you. But be careful, Emma. The Watcher is not to be underestimated. He knows the town's history, its secrets, and he will use them against you." The night was dark, and still as Emma left the church, Father Elias's words lingering in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The Watcher was coming, and the curse was growing stronger. She had to act fast, before the town was consumed by the darkness once again. She made her way through the streets of Ashbrook, the town now eerily quiet. The people had begun to rebuild, but Emma could sense the unease in the air. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know what lay beneath their feet, and if she didn't find a way to stop the curse, they never would. Her destination was clear. She needed to find the wellspring, the source of the curse. The Watcher had said it was buried deep beneath Ashbrook, and she was determined to uncover it. But where would she begin? The town had been built on centuries of history, and the deeper she dug, the more dangerous it would become. As she reached the outskirts of the town, Emma spotted the old cemetery on the hill. It was a place she had always avoided, a place that felt heavy with the weight of the past. The graves were ancient, weathered by time, and many of the names had long since faded from the stones. But something about the cemetery called to her now, as if it held the key to the answers she was searching for. She made her way up the hill, the crunch of dead leaves beneath her feet the only sound in the still night. The wind howled through the trees, and Emma pulled her jacket tighter around her, feeling the chill seep into her bones. The cemetery was silent, the moon casting long shadows over the graves. She could feel the weight of the past pressing down on her, but she couldn't stop now. At the farthest corner of the cemetery, she noticed something unusual: a large, ancient oak tree, its roots twisted and gnarled. The tree seemed out of place, as if it had been there long before the cemetery had been established. Emma approached it cautiously, her eyes scanning the ground for any sign of disturbance. As she reached the base of the tree, she noticed something strange, an inscription carved into the bark. It was faint, but it was there, just visible enough for her to make out the words. The roots of Ashbrook run deep. Beneath the earth lies the heart of the curse. Emma's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the tree, the roots, the wellspring. She knelt down and began to dig, her hands trembling as she scraped away the dirt and leaves. The earth was cold and hard, but she didn't stop. She had to find it. She had to find the source of the curse before it was too late. Minutes passed, then hours. Her fingers were raw, the soil caked under her nails, but she couldn't stop. She had to keep going. She had to uncover the truth. Finally, with one last desperate shove, her hand hit something solid. A stone. She pulled it free, her heart pounding in her chest. The stone was old, weathered, and covered in strange symbols that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. Emma stared at the stone, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She knew this was it, the heart of the curse, the source of Ashbrook's suffering. She reached out and touched the stone, and the moment her fingers made contact, a surge of energy shot through her body. The world around her seemed to spin, and she felt as though she were being pulled into the earth itself. The ground trembled beneath her, and the air was thick with the weight of something ancient, something powerful. Emma, a voice whispered, cold and familiar. "You found it, the heart of the curse. Now, you must decide what to do with it." The Watcher's voice. Emma's vision blurred as the darkness closed in around her. The stone pulsed with an unnatural light, and she felt a presence, something ancient, something malevolent, growing stronger. She had found the source of the curse, but now, the real battle was about to begin. The stone pulsed beneath Emma's fingers, its energy surging through her, binding her to the land in a way she couldn't fully comprehend. The world around her seemed to twist, the air thick with a malevolent force. The Watcher's voice echoed in her mind, cold and patient. "You found it, Emma," the voice whispered, "but now you must choose. The heart of Ashbrook's curse lies in your hands. What will you do with it?" Emma's heart raced as the weight of the moment pressed down on her. She could feel the ancient power within the stone, its pulse steady and relentless, like a heartbeat that had echoed through the earth for centuries. The land itself seemed to respond to her touch, shifting and trembling beneath her. The darkness was closing in, but she couldn't pull away. It was as though the stone had a hold on her, drawing her deeper into the very marrow of Ashbrook. She could hear whispers now, soft and indistinct, like the voices of the town's long-dead founders, their souls bound to the land in ways they had never intended. Their pact, their bargain with the ancient power. She could feel it all, whirling in the stone, waiting to be unleashed. "You have no choice but to decide," the Watcher's voice continued, now more insistent. "If you destroy it, you destroy the town's very foundation. But if you let it remain, the darkness will only grow stronger. It will consume everything." Emma's mind spun, the weight of his words crashing down on her. The curse was old, older than the harvest god, older than the keepers. It was rooted in Ashbrook itself, woven into the very fabric of the town. To destroy, it was to sever the last tie that bound the town to its cursed past. But what would that cost? What happens if I destroy it? she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. The Watcher's voice was almost a sigh. The land will wither. The people will forget. The darkness will be gone, but so too will the town's history, its legacy. Ashbrook will be nothing more than an empty shell, a place devoid of life and meaning. The people will be free, but they will have no memory of what they were. No memory of the pact that once bound them. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The people of Ashbrook had suffered for so long. Could she really condemn them to forget everything, to lose their history, their connection to the land? But then again, what had the curse given them? What had it truly cost them? She closed her eyes, her mind racing. The Watcher's words echoed in her head, but there was something else, something deeper, a pull in her gut, a sense of responsibility. The people of Ashbrook deserved to be free. They deserved to live without fear of the darkness that had haunted them for so long. But was that freedom worth the price? Emma opened her eyes and looked at the stone again. It seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, its symbols glowing faintly, as though alive with ancient power. She could feel the pulse of the curse, the heartbeat of Ashbrook, resonating in her bones. She had to make a choice. The ground beneath Emma's feet trembled again, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to come from the very core of the earth. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as though the land itself were crying out, begging her to make her decision. Emma's hand tightened around the stone. She could feel its power, its weight pressing down on her. It was as though the curse was alive, aware of her, watching her every move. The Watcher's presence loomed over her, an unseen force that seemed to hold her in place. "You are the key, Emma," the Watcher said, his voice now a low, haunting murmur. "Only you can decide what happens next. The curse has always been tied to the land, to the people. But you," his voice seemed to grow colder, more distant. "You are the one who can end it." Emma's mind reeled. The Watcher's words were clear, but the weight of the decision was overwhelming. Could she really destroy the very thing that had shaped Ashbrook? Could she erase the past, the memories, the people who had lived and died here? But then again, what had the curse given them? What had it really taken? The harvest god had been a manifestation of the darkness, but the darkness was older than that. It was tied to the very foundation of Ashbrook, to the land, to the pact made by the town's founders. If she destroyed the stone, she would sever the connection between the curse and the land. But the town, the people, they would lose everything. The past would be erased, and the curse would be gone, but so too would Ashbrook's history. Emma's heart ached with the weight of it all. The town had been built on the curse, its people living in the shadow of a pact they had never fully understood. But now, they had a chance to be free, to live without fear of the darkness, to live without the weight of the curse hanging over them. She couldn't let the Watcher win. She couldn't let the curse continue to feed on the land, on the people. The town deserved to be free. With a final, resolute breath, Emma raised the stone above her head. The air around her seemed to crackle with energy, the whispers growing louder, more frantic. She could feel the power of the curse trying to pull her in, trying to stop her. But she wouldn't let it. With one swift motion, she slammed the stone into the ground. The earth trembled violently as the stone shattered upon impact, its energy unleashing in a burst of blinding light. Emma was thrown backward, her body slamming into the ground with a sickening thud. The world around her seemed to collapse, the very air thick with the force of the explosion. For a moment, everything was silent, and then the land began to shake. The ground cracked open, fissures spreading outward from the site where the stone had been destroyed. The sky above seemed to darken, as though the heavens themselves were reacting to the breaking of the curse. The wind howled, and the trees around her bent and twisted, their roots tearing free from the earth. Emma struggled to her feet, her body aching from the impact. She looked around, her eyes wide with fear as the land seemed to twist and writhe beneath her. The curse was breaking, but the land was fighting back. It didn't want to let go. But Emma didn't stop. She couldn't. She had made her choice, and now there was no turning back. The earth beneath her feet cracked open wider, revealing a vast, blackened chasm beneath Ashbrook. The very heart of the town seemed to be unraveling, its foundations crumbling away. The land was dying, but the curse was being broken. And then, from the darkness, a figure emerged. It was the Watcher. He stood before her, his form shrouded in shadows, his eyes glowing with an eerie light. "You've done it," he said, his voice low and filled with a strange mixture of awe and regret. "You've destroyed the heart of the curse. But now, the town will pay the price." Emma's heart clenched. "What do you mean?" The Watcher's gaze softened, just for a moment. The curse has been with Ashbrook for so long that it has become part of its very being. Destroying it is like tearing out the heart of a living creature. The town will be free, but it will be lost. The people will forget. The land will wither. Emma's breath caught in her throat. "What do I do? What can I do?" The Watcher's eyes darkened, and for the first time, Emma saw a flicker of something like sadness in his gaze. "There is no way to undo what you've done. The curse is broken, but the cost is high. Ashbrook will never be the same." Emma stood there, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. She had freed the town from the darkness, but she had also condemned it to forget its past, its history. The people would live without the knowledge of what had happened here, without the connection to the land that had bound them for so long. But they would be free, and that in the end was all that mattered. The world felt unnaturally still. The air, thick with the remnants of the curse, hung heavy around Emma. The ground beneath her feet was cracked, fissures snaking across the earth like deep scars. The sky above was no longer darkened by the storm of the curse, but it wasn't quite clear either. An unsettling gray lingered, as though the land itself were holding its breath. The Watcher stood before her, his form more defined now, the shadows dissipating as the curse weakened. His eyes, glowing faintly with the remnants of the ancient power, locked onto hers. There was no anger in them, no malice, only a deep, sorrowful understanding. "You've broken the curse," he said, his voice a low whisper. "And now, the land will be empty." Emma's heart sank at the finality of his words. The land was empty. Ashbrook would never be the same again. The people would forget everything that had kept them bound to this place. The history, the pact, the suffering. They would live. Yes, but they would live without the weight of the past, without the connection to the land that had once sustained them. The Watcher stepped closer, his form shifting in the dim light, his presence both comforting and unnerving. The curse was not just a force of darkness. It was a part of Ashbrook's very being. Without it, the town will wither. The people will forget who they were, where they came from. The land will forget the pact that tied it all together. Emma swallowed hard, her eyes searching the ruins of Ashbrook. The town was quiet, but it was not the peaceful quiet of a place at rest. It was the silence of something lost, something that had been torn away and left behind. "Is there any way to save them?" Emma asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Is there any way to help them remember?" The Watcher's gaze softened, though there was little hope in his expression. "No," he replied simply. "The curse is gone, but so too is the bond that tied the people to this land. They will live, but they will live without memory. The land will remain, but it will no longer be Ashbrook." Emma's mind raced. She had broken the curse. She had freed the people. But now, she faced an even greater loss. The town, its people, its history, all slipping away into oblivion. She looked around at the ruins of Ashbrook, the twisted trees, the cracked earth. It was as if the very town was grieving, mourning the loss of its past. The people would forget, yes, but Emma would remember. She had to. She had to carry the memory of Ashbrook, of the curse, of the battle she had fought to free them all. The Watcher took a step back, his form beginning to fade, as though he were dissolving into the very air. "You have done what was necessary, Emma. The curse is broken. The land will heal, but it will never be the same." Emma nodded, though her heart felt heavy with the weight of what she had done. "Will you leave now?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. The Watcher's eyes met hers one final time, his expression unreadable. "I will remain, but I will no longer be the keeper of this land. My time here is done. You are the last of the Watchers now." The Watcher's form seemed to dissolve further, the shadows slipping away like smoke in the wind. His voice lingered, a faint echo that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Remember, Emma," he whispered. "The darkness is gone, but the price was high. Ashbrook will fade, and with it, the memory of what it was. But you will remember." And then he was gone. Days passed, weeks perhaps. Time had become an abstract thing to Emma. She wandered the empty streets of Ashbrook, the town now a shell of what it had once been. The people had returned, as if nothing had happened, as though the curse had never existed. They went about their daily lives, unaware of the battle fought beneath their feet, unaware of the darkness that had once consumed them. Emma had tried to speak to them, tried to make them remember, but it was as though the town itself had erased the past. No one recalled the harvest god, the Watcher, the curse. The town's history had been wiped clean, as though it had never been written in the first place. He had gone to Father Elias, hoping for some answers, but even he seemed to have forgotten. He looked at her with confusion, as if he had never known her, never known what she had done. His eyes were vacant, his face blank. The town had erased him too. He had visited the cemetery on the hill, where the roots of the curse had been buried, but even the ancient oak tree had begun to wither, its once gnarled branches now bare and lifeless. The land was healing, yes, but it was healing without the memory of what had come before. Emma stood in the center of Ashbrook, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. She had freed the town from the curse, but at what cost? The people were free, yes, but they were also lost. They were free of the darkness, but they had no memory of the fight, no memory of the sacrifices made to ensure their survival. She was the only one who remembered. She was the only one who knew what had been lost. But Emma couldn't help but wonder if that was enough. He had broken the curse. He had freed the people. He had done what no one else could have done. And maybe, in the end, that was all that mattered. As the weeks turned into months, Emma began to feel the weight of her solitude. The town had moved on, but she hadn't. She couldn't. The memory of the curse, of the Watcher, of the battle she had fought, it all still lingered within her. She had been the one to break the curse, the one to make the ultimate choice. But now, she was alone in a town that had forgotten everything. She stood at the edge of Ashbrook, looking out over the land. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the town. The air was quiet, peaceful even. But beneath that peace, Emma could feel the lingering presence of the curse. It was gone, yes, but the echoes of its power still remained, like the fading aftershocks of a storm. And then, for the first time since she had broken the curse, Emma felt a sense of clarity. The Watcher had said she was the last of the Watchers. But what did that mean? Was she supposed to carry the memory of Ashbrook, of the curse, alone? Or was there something more she was meant to do? She turned and walked toward the heart of the town, the place where the curse had first taken root. The streets were quiet, the people going about their business, unaware of the weight of what had happened. But Emma knew, and that was enough. The days blurred together, and Emma found herself in a strange, liminal space. The town had settled into a quiet rhythm, but the absence of the curse left a void that seemed to stretch endlessly. She wandered the streets, observing the people of Ashbrook, their faces blank and unaware, as if they had never known the darkness that had once gripped them. It was as though the curse had been a dream, a shadow that had vanished with the dawn. But Emma knew better. She knew the truth, and it weighed heavily on her. Each morning, she woke with the knowledge that she was the only one who remembered what had happened. The others went about their lives, blissfully unaware of the sacrifice she had made, of the price that had been paid to free them from the curse. They were free, yes, but they were also empty. They had no history, no memory of what had bound them to the land. They were like ghosts, drifting through a town that had no past. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was being pulled in two directions, one foot in the present, one in the past. She had broken the curse, freed the town, but the cost had been high. The people were free, but they were also lost, adrift in a world that had no connection to their roots. She stood at the edge of the cemetery once more, staring at the weathered stones that marked the graves of those who had once lived in Ashbrook. The land was quiet now, the air still, but there was something in the wind, a whisper that seemed to come from the earth itself. Remember, the wind seemed to say, remember what was lost. Emma knelt by the oldest grave, her fingers brushing the cool stone. The name was worn, nearly illegible, but she knew who it was. It was the grave of the first watcher, the one who had made the pact that had bound the town to the curse. The stone had been here for centuries, a silent witness to the passing of time. And now, it was just another forgotten piece of Ashbrook's history. Emma had always known that the Watcher had been a part of the town's history, but now she understood what it truly meant. The Watchers had been the keepers of Ashbrook, the guardians of the pact that had tied the town to the land. They had been bound to the curse, to the land itself, just as the people had been. And now, with the curse broken, Emma was the last of them. She had thought that breaking the curse would free her, that it would give her a sense of peace. But instead, it had left her with a burden she hadn't anticipated, the weight of memory. The Watcher's role had always been to remember, to hold the past in place. But now, there was no one left to carry that memory but her. The people of Ashbrook had forgotten everything. They were free, but they were also adrift, like ships without a rudder. They had no connection to the land, no understanding of the pact that had once held them in its grip. They were living in a town that had no past, no meaning beyond the present moment. And Emma was the only one who knew what had been lost. She sat by the old oak tree, the one that had once been the heart of the curse, now withered and dying. The land was healing, yes, but there was no life left in it. The curse had been the lifeblood of Ashbrook, and now that it was gone, the town was fading slowly but surely. Emma closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on her. The Watcher had said she was the last of them, the last to remember. But what did that mean? Was she supposed to carry the burden of Ashbrook's history alone? Was she meant to be the keeper of a town that no longer existed? The wind stirred, and Emma opened her eyes. There in the distance, she saw someone moving through the town. It was a figure, tall and shrouded in shadow, walking with purpose. It was the Watcher, or at least someone who resembled him. His form flickered in the fading light, like a ghost, a remnant of the past. He stopped in front of her, his eyes glowing faintly. "You have done what was needed," he said, his voice soft, almost comforting. "But now, the land will heal. The people will forget, and you will be left to carry the memory." Emma stood, her heart pounding in her chest. "But I can't do it alone. I can't carry this weight forever." The Watcher nodded, his expression unreadable. "No one can carry it alone, but you must decide what to do with it. The past will fade, but the future is yours to shape." Emma's mind raced. The past, the curse, the Watcher, they were all fading. The people of Ashbrook were moving forward, living in a world without memory. But what about her? What about the history that had been erased? "You said I was the last of the Watchers," Emma said, her voice trembling. "What does that mean? Am I supposed to carry this burden forever?" The Watcher's gaze softened, and for a moment, Emma saw something like compassion in his eyes. "No," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The burden of memory is not meant to be carried alone, but you must decide what to do with it. Will you let it fade, like the town itself? Or will you find a way to preserve it, to ensure that the people of Ashbrook never forget what was lost?" Emma's heart clenched. The choice was hers. She could let the past fade, let the town live without memory, without the weight of what had happened. Or she could try to preserve it, to find a way to keep the memory of the curse alive, even if it meant carrying that burden for the rest of her life. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "I don't know if I can carry it forever." The Watcher stepped closer, his presence comforting yet distant. "You don't have to carry it forever, but you must decide. The memory of Ashbrook is yours to keep, but only you can decide what to do with it." Emma stood there, her mind racing, the weight of the past pressing down on her. The town was healing. The people were free, but the memory of what had happened would always linger. The curse had been broken, but the land would never be the same. The past would always be a part of her, whether she wanted it to be or not. And as the sun set over Ashbrook, Emma made her decision. Emma stood at the edge of the town, looking out over the land. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the echoes of the past. The curse was gone, but the memory remained. She could feel it deep within her bones. The Watcher had given her a choice: to let the past fade, or to carry it forward, to ensure that Ashbrook never forgot. The weight of that decision had been overwhelming, but now, in the quiet of the evening, Emma knew what she had to do. She couldn't let Ashbrook forget. She couldn't let the people live without knowing what had happened, without understanding the price that had been paid for their freedom. The land, the town, the people, they deserved to remember. They deserved to know what had been lost. And so, Emma made her choice. She would carry the memory of Ashbrook, of the curse, of the Watchers. She would be the keeper of the past, the guardian of the town's history. The burden would be hers, but it was a burden she was willing to bear. The people of Ashbrook would live without the curse, but they would never be without the memory. Emma would ensure that. She would make sure that the town's history, its legacy, was never forgotten. And in that moment, she knew that the past, though painful, would never truly fade. It would live on in her, in the land, in the very heart of Ashbrook. Time passed slowly after Emma's decision. The town of Ashbrook continued to heal, its people living in a world that was both familiar and foreign. They went about their days as if nothing had ever happened, as though the curse had never existed, as though the land had never been gripped by darkness. But Emma knew better. She carried the weight of their history, their past, the sacrifices made to free them from the curse. She carried it alone. Every day, she would visit the cemetery, the oak tree, the old stones that marked the graves of those who had lived and died before. She would sit by the tree, her fingers tracing the worn names, the faces of the past flickering in her mind. The Watcher had gone, his presence fading into the ether, but Emma remained. She was the keeper now. She was the last to remember. She had built a small shrine by the oak tree, a quiet place where she could reflect, where she could honor those who had come before. She placed candles there, flowers, small tokens of remembrance. The people of Ashbrook didn't know why she did it. They didn't know why the cemetery still felt different to her, why the land seemed to hum with a quiet energy that they couldn't sense. But Emma felt it. She felt the connection to the past, to the land, to the people who had been lost to time. The curse was gone, but its memory lived on in her. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the town, Emma stood by the cemetery, the wind whispering through the trees. The air felt charged, as though something ancient was stirring beneath the surface. Emma closed her eyes, feeling the familiar pull of the past. It was always there, lurking just beyond her reach, but tonight it felt different, stronger. She turned toward the old oak tree, her heart racing. The wind picked up, swirling around her, carrying with it a faint whisper, a voice she hadn't heard in a long time. Emma. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The voice was faint, but unmistakable. It was the Watcher's voice. But how? He had vanished. His presence had faded when the curse was broken. She had thought he was gone, that his role had ended. Emma. The voice called again, and this time it was clearer. It was coming from the tree itself. Her pulse quickened, her feet moving on their own as she walked toward the oak. The wind howled around her, but the world seemed to quiet in that moment, the air thick with anticipation. She reached out, her fingers brushing the rough bark of the tree. It was warm, pulsing with energy, as though the tree itself were alive. And then, in a flash of light, the Watcher appeared before her. His form was translucent, his edges flickering like a candle's flame, but his eyes, those glowing eyes, were unmistakable. He was here, standing before her, his presence as powerful as it had been when she first met him. "Watcher," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. How? How are you here? The Watcher's gaze softened. I am no longer bound to the land, Emma. The curse is broken, and my role has ended. But you are the keeper now. You are the one who remembers. Emma shook her head. I don't understand. I thought you were gone. I thought I was alone in this. You are not alone, the Watcher said gently. The land still remembers. The people may have forgotten, but the land has not. It will always carry the echoes of what was. And you, Emma, you are its guardian. You are the one who holds the memory. But I can't do this forever, Emma said, her voice breaking. I can't carry this weight alone. The town is moving on, and I'm stuck in the past. The Watcher's eyes glowed softly. You are not stuck, Emma. You are the bridge between the past and the future. The memory you carry is not a burden. It is a gift. You will pass it on when the time is right. The town will remember again, in its own way, in its own time. Emma's heart ached at his words. She had hoped for peace, for release from the weight of the past, but it seemed that her role was far from over. She was the keeper of Ashbrook's history, the last to remember. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't meant to carry this alone forever. How long will I have to remember? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The Watcher smiled, though it was a sad, knowing smile. You will remember for as long as you need to, but there will come a time when the town will remember, when the curse will truly be gone. When that time comes, you will know, and when that time comes, you will pass the memory on. Emma looked at the Watcher, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She had always known that her role was not a simple one, that breaking the curse had not been the end. It had only been the beginning. The town would move on, but the past would never truly fade. She would carry it, and when the time was right, she would pass it on. And so, Emma stood there, beneath the old oak tree, the Watcher's presence a comforting yet bittersweet reminder of the past. She was the keeper now. She would carry the memory of Ashbrook, of the curse, of the people who had once been bound to the land. She would carry it until the time came for the town to remember again. Years passed, and Emma continued her quiet vigil over Ashbrook. The town had changed, its people had grown, and life moved forward. The streets were no longer empty, the houses no longer abandoned. The curse was a distant memory, a fading shadow in the collective mind of the town. But Emma knew the truth. She had never stopped being the keeper, never stopped carrying the memory of what had been lost. The shrine she had built by the oak tree became a place of quiet reverence, a spot where Emma would sit, reflect, and remember. The townspeople never asked about it. They never questioned her devotion to the past. They simply lived their lives, unaware of the weight Emma carried. But as time passed, something began to shift. The whispers in the wind grew louder, the echoes of the past more persistent. Emma could feel it, something was changing. The land was waking, the people were beginning to remember. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Emma stood by the oak tree, her fingers brushing the bark. The air was thick with the hum of energy, a pulse that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. She closed her eyes, feeling the presence of the Watcher once more. You were right, she whispered, her voice soft in the evening breeze. The time is coming. The Watcher's voice, faint but unmistakable, echoed in her mind. The time is near, Emma. The town will remember. You have kept the memory, and now it is time for the people to know. Emma smiled, a sense of peace settling over her. The curse had been broken. The town had moved on, but the memory would never fade. It was a part of her, a part of Ashbrook. And when the time came, the people would remember. It was a crisp autumn evening when Emma first noticed the change. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves, and the town of Ashbrook seemed to be bathed in the soft, golden glow of the setting sun. She had spent the day in the cemetery, as she often did, reflecting on the land's history, the weight of the curse, and the people who had been freed from it. But today, something was different. The wind had begun to stir in a way that felt purposeful. There was a low hum in the air, like the town itself was waking from a long slumber. It was as if the land was calling to her, beckoning her toward something she couldn't yet see. Emma stood by the oak tree, the place where she had so often felt the presence of the Watcher, and closed her eyes. The hum of energy that had been building over the years was now undeniable, vibrating through her bones. It was as if the past, the curse, and the memory of Ashbrook itself were all converging in this moment. She opened her eyes and looked around. The cemetery, the town, the land. Everything seemed to shimmer with an ethereal glow, as though the veil between the past and the present was thinning. The air was charged, filled with an ancient energy that Emma had never felt so strongly before. The time had come. The people of Ashbrook were about to remember. The next morning, Emma walked through the town, her senses heightened. The town felt different now, the hum of energy still lingering in the air. As she passed by the bakery, the town's cafe, and the old market square, she began to notice subtle changes in the people. There was a look in their eyes, a flicker of recognition that hadn't been there before. It was as if something deep within them was stirring, awakening. At first, Emma thought she was imagining it, but as the day went on, the signs became clearer. People began to speak of dreams they had, dreams of a dark time, of a curse that had gripped the town. Some mentioned vague memories of strange occurrences, of faces they couldn't quite place, of an ancient pact that seemed to have bound them all. It was as if the past was slowly seeping back into their consciousness, piece by piece. Emma knew that this was the beginning. The town was remembering. She visited the cemetery again that evening, drawn by an inexplicable pull. The oak tree seemed to hum with energy, its branches swaying as though it were alive, as though it were part of the land's awakening. She sat by the tree, her hand resting on the cool bark, and closed her eyes. The Watcher's voice came to her once more, clear and strong. "It is time, Emma. The memory is returning to them." She nodded, a bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. But will they understand? Will they remember everything? The curse, the price we pay? The Watcher's voice was gentle, but filled with a deep, knowing sorrow. They will remember what they need to. The past is never truly forgotten, Emma. It lives on in the land, in the people, in the very air they breathe. It was always meant to return in time. As the days passed, the memories of the town's past began to resurface more vividly. People started to gather in the town square, drawn together by an unspoken force. They spoke of the strange dreams they had been having, of fleeting images and fragmented memories. Some remembered the curse that had once bound them, the darkness that had gripped Ashbrook, while others recalled the faces of those who had been lost to time. Emma watched from the outskirts, her heart heavy with the weight of it all. She had known this moment would come, but seeing the town awaken to the truth of its past was both a relief and a sorrow. The people were remembering, but they were also reliving the pain and the fear of the curse. They had forgotten for so long, and now they had to face the reality of what had been lost. As the crowd gathered, Emma stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You are remembering," she said, her eyes scanning the faces of the people she had once known as strangers. "The curse is broken, but the memory of what happened, of what was lost, will always be a part of you. It will always be a part of Ashbrook." The people fell silent, their eyes wide with realization. They began to speak, sharing their fragmented memories, piecing together the history that had been erased. The stories of the Watchers, of the pact that had bound them to the land, of the sacrifices that had been made, all of it came flooding back. Emma listened, her heart heavy with the knowledge that the past would never truly fade. The town would remember, but it would also have to come to terms with what had happened. They would have to face the truth of the curse, the darkness that had once held them in its grip. And Emma, the last of the Watchers, would be there to guide them through it. As the days turned into weeks, the people of Ashbrook slowly began to rebuild their understanding of their past. The town's history was no longer a forgotten story. It was alive, woven into the fabric of their lives. The people spoke of the Watchers, of the pact that had once bound them to the land, and of the sacrifices made to break the curse. They spoke of Emma, the one who had carried the memory, the one who had kept the town's history alive. But Emma knew that her role was not over. The Watcher's legacy had been passed to her, and now it was time for her to pass it on. The people of Ashbrook had remembered, but they needed someone to guide them, to help them understand the lessons of the past. Emma could not carry the weight of the memory forever. The time had come for her to pass the torch. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma stood by the oak tree once more, her fingers tracing the bark. She could feel the presence of the Watcher, as strong as ever. It was time. "You were right," she whispered, her voice soft. "The memory has returned. The town remembers." The Watcher's voice, faint but comforting, echoed in her mind. "And now, Emma, you must pass the legacy on. The memory will live on in the hearts of the people. They will carry it forward, as you have." Emma closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. She had done what she was meant to do. She had kept the memory alive. And now, the people of Ashbrook would carry it forward, in their own way, in their own time. As the wind whispered through the trees, Emma smiled. The curse was broken, the town was free, and the memory would live on, forever woven into the land. The weeks following Emma's revelation were a time of reflection and transformation for Ashbrook. The people had come to terms with the truth of their past, and the town began to heal in ways that went beyond the physical. The memories that had once been buried deep within their collective consciousness were now shared openly, and with each passing day, the town grew stronger, more unified. Emma's role as the keeper had not ended with the town's awakening. She had been the bridge between the past and the present, the one who had kept the memory of the curse alive. But now, she could feel the time drawing near. The burden of the past had been passed to the people, and it was time for her to step away. The oak tree, the cemetery, the land itself, these had been her sanctuary, her place of solace. But now, she felt a pull towards something new, something beyond the weight of history. She had spent years guarding the past, ensuring that the memory of Ashbrook's curse would never be forgotten. But the future was calling to her now, a future that she had once believed was out of reach. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma walked through the town for the last time. She passed by the familiar houses, the market square, and the bakery where she had often stopped for bread and pastries. The town was different now, its people changed. There was a sense of hope in the air, a quiet optimism that had not been there before. The curse was no longer a shadow hanging over them, and the town was free. She reached the cemetery, the place where it had all begun. The oak tree stood tall, its branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. Emma approached it, her heart heavy with a mixture of sorrow and relief. She had spent so many years here, so many years carrying the weight of the past. But now, she was ready to let go. She placed her hand on the rough bark of the tree, feeling the pulse of energy that still lingered within it. The Watcher's presence was still there, faint but comforting. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "I've done my part," she whispered. "The town remembers. The curse is broken. It's time for me to go." The wind rustled through the leaves, and for a moment, Emma felt a deep sense of peace. The Watcher's voice, faint but clear, echoed in her mind. "You have done more than your part, Emma. You have carried the memory, and now, the town will carry it forward. You are free to live your life." Emma smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you for everything." The wind seemed to sigh in response, and Emma felt a sense of finality wash over her. The time had come to let go of the past and step into the future. She turned away from the oak tree, her heart light with the knowledge that Ashbrook was no longer bound by the curse. It was free. The following months were a time of renewal for Emma. She left Ashbrook, venturing into the world beyond the town she had spent so many years protecting. The weight of the past no longer held her back, and she was free to explore a future that had once seemed impossible. She traveled to distant cities, meeting new people, experiencing new cultures, and discovering parts of herself that had been buried under the weight of her responsibilities. She learned to live without the constant reminder of the curse, without the burden of being the keeper of Ashbrook's history. The world was vast, and Emma was ready to embrace it. But even as she moved forward, the memory of Ashbrook stayed with her. She never forgot the town, the people, or the land that had shaped her. The lessons she had learned, the sacrifices that had been made, would always be a part of her. She had carried the memory for so long, and now it was woven into the very fabric of her being. One day, as she sat on a bench in a bustling city park, Emma pulled out a small notebook that she had kept with her for years. It was filled with sketches, notes, and reflections on her time in Ashbrook. She flipped through the pages, each one a reminder of the journey she had taken. The faces of the people, the moments of fear and triumph, the whispers of the watcher, all of it was there, preserved in the pages of her notebook. She smiled, closing the book and tucking it into her bag. The past would always be a part of her, but she had learned that it was okay to move forward. She had done her part. Ashbrook was free, and the memory would live on, not as a burden, but as a legacy. Years passed, and Emma's journey continued. She found new purpose, new meaning in her life. She built a family, a community of her own, and though she never returned to Ashbrook, the town's memory was always with her. She had been the keeper, the one who had ensured that the past was never forgotten. But now, she was living her own story, her own legacy. In Ashbrook, life went on as well. The town had flourished, its people living in peace, free from the curse that had once bound them. The memory of the Watchers, of the dark past, remained a part of their history, but it was no longer a shadow over their lives. The people of Ashbrook had found a way to honor their past without being consumed by it. And in the cemetery, beneath the old oak tree, a small plaque had been placed in Emma's honor. It reads simply, "To the keeper of Ashbrook's memory, may the past never be forgotten, and may the future always be bright." Emma never saw the plaque, but she knew it was there. It was a symbol of the legacy she had left behind, a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. Years had passed since Emma left Ashbrook, but the town story was far from over. Life had moved forward, the curse broken, the land healed, but there were still whispers in the wind, faint echoes of the past that had never truly faded. The people of Ashbrook had found peace, but as Emma had once known, the past has a way of reaching out when you least expect it. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun set behind the hill, a young woman named Clara stood by the oak tree in the cemetery. She was new to Ashbrook, having moved there only a few months prior, seeking a fresh start after a series of personal losses. The town was quiet, peaceful, almost too peaceful. There was something about the place that felt like it was holding its breath, as if waiting for something to happen. Clara had heard the stories, of course. Everyone in town had. They spoke of the curse that had once bound the land, of the mysterious figure known as the Watcher, and of the woman who had kept the town's memory alive, Emma. But Clara didn't believe in such things. She had come to Ashbrook for its tranquility, not its legends. Yet, as she stood by the old oak tree, a strange sensation washed over her. The air was thick with energy, and she could feel the weight of something ancient pressing down on her. It was as though the land itself was calling to her, just as it had once called to Emma. Clara reached out and placed her hand on the rough bark of the tree. The moment her fingers made contact, a sharp jolt of energy coursed through her, and she gasped, stumbling back. Her heart raced, and her breath caught in her throat. She had felt something deep and powerful, something that connected her to the very heart of Ashbrook. That night, Clara's dreams were filled with vivid images, flashes of a dark past, of a town gripped by fear, of faces she didn't recognize but somehow knew. She saw the Watcher, his eyes glowing with a strange intensity, and Emma, standing by the oak tree, her face a mixture of sorrow and determination. When Clara awoke, the images still lingered in her mind, haunting her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the town's history had somehow reached out to her. She had always been a skeptic, but now she wasn't so sure. She had felt the energy, the pull of the land, and it wasn't the first time she had felt it. For the past few weeks, Clara had been experiencing strange dreams, dreams that felt more like memories, as though they were not her own. She had brushed them off as stress, but now, standing in the cemetery the day after her unsettling experience by the oak tree, she knew something deeper was at play. Clara returned to the cemetery that afternoon, drawn to the oak tree once more. She could feel the pull, the same way Emma must have. The wind whispered through the branches, and Clara's eyes landed on a small plaque near the base of the tree. She hadn't noticed it before. She bent down to read it. To the keeper of Ashbrook's memory, may the past never be forgotten, and may the future always be bright. Her heart skipped a beat. She had heard the name Emma, but this plaque, this tribute to the past, felt like more than just a symbol. It felt like a calling. Clara had no idea why, but she knew that the story of Ashbrook wasn't over. There was something still buried beneath the surface, something that had been waiting for the right person to uncover it. As the days passed, Clara couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease that followed her. She began to investigate the town's history, diving into old records, newspaper clippings, and town archives. The more she learned, the more she realized that Ashbrook's past was not as simple as it seemed. The curse, the watchers, the sacrifices, all of it was real, and somehow it was all tied to her. One evening, after weeks of research, Clara sat in the small town library, surrounded by stacks of old papers. She had uncovered something that made her blood run cold. A letter from Emma, written shortly before she left Ashbrook. The letter was addressed to no one in particular, but it was clear that Emma had known that the curse might return one day. In the letter, Emma spoke of her role as the keeper and of the moment when the memory of Ashbrook would return to the people. She had written that the land would always carry the echoes of the past, and that one day, someone would come to pick up where she had left off. Clara's hand trembled as she read the final lines of the letter. The memory will live on, and when the time is right, the next keeper will rise. The land will call to them, and they will answer. Clara closed the letter slowly, her mind racing. She had felt the call, the pull of the land. She had been drawn to the oak tree, to the cemetery, to the town itself. Could it be? Was she the next keeper? As Clara stood before the oak tree once more, she felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. The town had healed, the curse had been broken, but the land was still bound by something ancient, something that had never truly let go. The Watcher's legacy had not been erased, it had been passed down, waiting for the right person to carry it forward. Clara placed her hand on the tree again, this time with a sense of purpose. The energy surged through her, stronger than before, as though the land recognized her, acknowledging her as the one who would carry the memory. The whispers of the past filled her mind, images of the Watcher, of Emma, of the sacrifices made to break the curse. And then, the Watcher's voice came to her, clear and resonant. You have answered the call, Clara. The land has chosen you. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She looked around, half expecting to see the Watcher himself standing before her. But he was not there. His presence was more like a whisper in her mind, a feeling that permeated the air. The land remembers, the Watcher continued. And now, you will carry its memory. You will guide the people of Ashbrook, just as Emma did before you. Clara nodded, feeling a sense of clarity wash over her. She understood now. She was the keeper, the one who would ensure that the memory of Ashbrook, the curse, and the sacrifices made to break it would never be forgotten. The land had called to her, just as it had called to Emma. He was the bridge between the past and the future, the one who would ensure that the story of Ashbrook continued. The town of Ashbrook was still healing, still moving forward, but the whispers of the past would never be silenced. Clara, now the new keeper, would carry the memory of the curse, the Watchers, and the sacrifices made to break it. He would ensure that the town would never forget, that the lessons of the past would always guide them. As Clara stood beneath the oak tree, the wind rustling through the branches, she knew that her journey was just beginning. The land had called to her, and she had answered. She was the keeper now, and the memory of Ashbrook would live on. Clara had not anticipated how heavy the mantle of the keeper would be. The oak tree stood as a silent sentinel, watching over the town, its branches stretching out like the arms of a guardian. As she stood beneath its boughs, Clara could feel the weight of history pressing down on her. The memories of Ashbrook, the curse, the Watchers, it was all now her responsibility. The first few weeks had been a blur of strange occurrences. Dreams that weren't her own, echoes of voices that whispered from the shadows, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. At first, she had tried to dismiss them as the result of stress, but deep down, Clara knew they were more than just figments of her imagination. The land was alive with memory, and it was reaching out to her. One evening, as Clara walked through the town square, she passed by the old bakery, where the windows had once been fogged with the heat of freshly baked bread. Now the shop stood quiet, its windows dark. She had learned that the bakery's owner, Mrs. Tinsley, had passed away a few weeks ago, leaving behind a small family with no means to continue the business. It was a sign of the town's slow unraveling, life moving forward, but at a cost. Clara had not expected the role of keeper to be so isolating. She had thought that, once she took on the mantle, the town would embrace her, that they would recognize her as the one who would protect them from the past. But instead, there was a quiet distance in the way people looked at her. It was as though they saw something in her, something they couldn't quite place. They felt the weight of the past, too, and they feared it. The burden of keeping the memory alive was not just hers to bear. It was the town's collective responsibility, and Clara had yet to find a way to bring them together. The first true test of Clara's role as keeper came unexpectedly. It was a cold, windy night when the strange happenings in Ashbrook escalated. The wind howled through the streets, rattling windows and shaking the old trees. Clara had just returned from the cemetery, where she had spent hours meditating beneath the oak tree, trying to connect with the land. The whispers had grown louder, and she knew that something was coming. At around midnight, a loud knock on her door startled her from a restless sleep. She opened it to find a frantic Mrs. Cartwright, an elderly woman who lived at the edge of town. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "Clara, you have to come quickly," Mrs. Cartwright gasped. "It's happening again." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "What's happening?" "The visions, the shadows," Mrs. Cartwright whispered, her voice shaking. "The land is calling to them again. I can feel it. The curse is not truly gone." Clara's blood ran cold. She had suspected that the land might not be completely free of the curse, but to hear it spoken aloud by someone else made it all too real. The past, it seemed, was not finished with Ashbrook. Clara followed Mrs. Cartwright through the winding streets, the wind biting at her skin as they walked. The town felt different tonight, darker, as if the shadows themselves were stretching out, reaching for something. As they neared the edge of town, Clara saw what Mrs. Cartwright meant. A group of people had gathered near the old mill, their faces pale and wide-eyed. They were staring into the night, their gazes fixed on something that Clara couldn't yet see. The air was thick with tension, as if the town itself was holding its breath. "What's going on?" Clara asked, her voice firm, though her heart was racing. One of the townspeople, a man named Peter, turned to her, his eyes filled with fear. "It's the shadows," he said, his voice trembling. "They're back. We've been seeing them for days, moving in the corners of our vision, whispering our names." Clara's pulse quickened. She had heard of such things before, strange, shadowy figures that haunted the land, remnants of the curse that had once gripped Ashbrook. But to hear that they were returning was a terrifying thought. "We need to do something," Clara said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. "We need to confront them." Mrs. Cartwright nodded. "The land has not fully released its hold. The Watchers are still tied to it. The shadows are their legacy, and they are coming back to claim what they once had." Clara felt the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her once again. The town had thought the curse was broken, but it seemed that the land had never fully let go. The shadows were the last remnants of the Watchers, and they were returning to reclaim their power. Clara knew that the only way to stop the shadows was to perform the binding ritual, an ancient ceremony that would sever the last ties between the Watchers and the land. She had learned of it in Emma's journals, hidden away in the town's archives. It was a ritual that required the strength of the land itself, the presence of the keeper, and the willingness of the people to face the past. The townspeople gathered in the cemetery, drawn together by Clara's determination. She stood before the oak tree, her hand resting on its bark, feeling the pulse of energy that flowed through the land. The whispers of the past were louder now, but Clara had learned to quiet her mind and focus on the task at hand. "We must face the shadows together," Clara said, her voice carrying through the crowd. "We must bind the land once more, sever the ties that still bind us to the Watchers." The townspeople stood in a circle around her, their hands linked together. The wind had picked up, swirling around them like a storm. Clara closed her eyes and began to chant the ancient words from Emma's journals, the language of the Watchers that had been passed down through generations. As she spoke, the ground beneath her feet trembled. The shadows began to move, swirling around the town, their forms flickering in and out of existence. They were drawn to the energy of the ritual, but Clara could feel their power weakening with each word she spoke. The land was fighting back, and Clara could feel it. The oak tree's energy surged, its roots reaching deep into the earth, anchoring the ritual. The shadows writhed, but they could not escape the binding force that Clara was invoking. With a final, powerful chant, Clara slammed her hand against the tree. The wind howled, and the shadows screamed, their forms dissolving into the air. The town was still, the tension broken. The next morning, the town of Ashbrook was quiet. The shadows were gone, and the land felt lighter, as though a great weight had been lifted. Clara stood by the oak tree, her hand resting on its bark once more. The whispers had faded, the land had been freed, and the curse, finally, was truly broken. The people of Ashbrook gathered around her, their faces filled with gratitude and awe. They had faced the past together, and they had emerged stronger for it. "You did it," Mrs. Cartwright said, her voice full of reverence. "You freed us." Clara nodded, feeling the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. "We did it together," she said softly. "The land will remember, but it no longer controls us. The curse is truly gone." As Clara looked around at the people of Ashbrook, she knew that her role as the keeper had not ended with the binding ritual. It was a new beginning for the town, a beginning where the past no longer haunted them, and where the future was theirs to shape. Ashbrook had begun to heal, its people freed from the shadows that had haunted them for so long. But Clara knew that the land, while lighter, was never truly static. The balance between the past and the future was delicate, and she had to remain vigilant. As the keeper, she had not only the responsibility to protect the town from the echoes of its dark history, but also to ensure that the lessons of the past were passed on. The cemetery, once a place of sorrow and fear, had transformed. It was now a place of reflection, a symbol of the town's resilience. The oak tree stood tall, its branches reaching toward the sky, a living monument to the sacrifices made. Yet, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, something watching from the edges of the town. It wasn't just the memories of the Watchers that lingered, it was their legacy. The Watchers had been bound to the land for generations, and even though the shadows had been driven away, their influence was not easily erased. One evening, as Clara walked through the quiet streets of Ashbrook, she felt it again, a faint pull at the edges of her consciousness. It was the same feeling she had experienced when she first arrived in town, when the land had called to her. But this time it was different. The pull was subtle, almost imperceptible, like the faintest whisper on the wind. Clara stopped in her tracks, her heart racing. She turned slowly, scanning the street behind her. There was no one in sight, but she could feel the presence. The Watcher, was it still out there watching her? The next morning, Clara couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her chest. She spent the day trying to focus on the tasks at hand, organizing the town's records, meeting with the townspeople, and ensuring that the land remained at peace. But the feeling of being watched never left her. It was as if something was lingering just beyond the veil of reality, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. That night, as Clara sat in her small study, poring over Emma's journals once more, she felt it, a cold gust of wind that swept through the room. The windows were closed, and the door was locked. She stood up quickly, her pulse quickening. The air felt charged, as though something was about to happen. Suddenly, the candle on her desk flickered, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She knew that this was no ordinary draft. This was the Watcher. The presence she had sensed for so long was now manifesting in her home. Without thinking, Clara grabbed the old tome that Emma had left behind, the one that contained the rituals of the Watchers. She flipped through the pages, her fingers trembling, until she found the passage she was looking for. The ritual to sever the last of the Watchers' influence on the land. But before she could begin, the shadows in the room seemed to deepen. They twisted and stretched, forming a figure, a tall, dark silhouette with glowing eyes. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She knew who it was. The Watcher had returned. Clara stood frozen, the book clutched in her hands. The Watcher's figure loomed before her, its eyes burning with an otherworldly light. It spoke, its voice like a whisper in her mind, cold and ancient. "You think you have freed the land, Clara," the Watcher intoned. "But the past cannot be erased so easily. I am the memory of Ashbrook, and I will never leave." Clara's hands shook, but she forced herself to speak. "I've broken the curse. The shadows are gone. You have no power here." The Watcher's laugh echoed in the room, a hollow, echoing sound that sent chills down her spine. "The curse may be broken, but I am not the curse. I am the keeper of Ashbrook's history, its memories. You cannot banish me. You can only bind me." Clara's mind raced. She knew the Watcher spoke the truth. It was not just a shadow of the past. It was the embodiment of Ashbrook's history, its pain, its sacrifices. It had been bound to the land for so long that it could not simply disappear. But she also knew that she could not allow it to continue to haunt the town, to control the future. "I will bind you," Clara said, her voice steady, "but not in the way you expect." She opened the book to the final page, where the ritual was described in detail. The words on the page seemed to glow in the dim light, and Clara began to chant, her voice rising in strength. The Watcher's form flickered, its eyes narrowing. "You cannot control me," it hissed. "I am Ashbrook's past. I am its soul." Clara's voice grew louder, more forceful, as she recited the incantation. The room seemed to vibrate with energy, and the Watcher's form began to dissolve, its shadowy limbs stretching and twisting as though trying to escape the binding force. But Clara did not relent. She poured every ounce of her will into the ritual, her heart steady and resolute. She could feel the land beneath her feet responding, the oak tree's roots pulsing with energy as if lending their strength to the spell. With one final, powerful word, Clara slammed the book shut. The Watcher let out a deafening scream, its form collapsing into a cloud of smoke and dust. The shadows that had clung to the room vanished, leaving only silence in their wake. Clara stood in the center of the room, breathing heavily. The presence of the Watcher had vanished, but the weight of its departure lingered in the air. He had succeeded, but at what cost? The Watcher was bound, yes, but the land's history, the memories, would never truly disappear. The next morning, Clara returned to the oak tree, her thoughts heavy. The town was still, the air clear, but she knew that the balance between the past and the future was a fragile thing. The Watcher had been bound, but it was not gone. The land would always remember, and the echoes of Ashbrook's history would continue to shape its future. As Clara stood beneath the tree, she felt the weight of the past settle around her like a cloak. She was the keeper, the one who held the memory of Ashbrook. And while the shadows had been vanquished, the land's history would always remain. But now, Clara understood, the key was not to erase the past, but to learn from it, to ensure that the mistakes of history were never repeated. The land had called to her, and she had answered. She was the bridge between the past and the future, and she would continue to guide Ashbrook forward, ensuring that its story was never forgotten. Clara sat at the edge of the oak tree, her hands resting on the earth, feeling the pulse of the land beneath her. The town of Ashbrook had been quiet for days since the binding of the Watcher, but there was an underlying tension in the air. She could sense it, the weight of something unfinished, something still lurking beneath the surface. The land had been freed from the shadows, but it was not entirely at peace. As the keeper, Clara had thought she could simply protect the town from the past. But the more she learned, the more she understood that the land itself held the key to its future. The curse had been broken, the Watcher bound, but there was still much work to be done. Ashbrook was not just a town. It was a living entity, its history intertwined with the very soil, the trees, the winds. And that history, as much as it was a burden, was also a gift. Clara rose from her seat, brushing the dirt from her hands. She had spent countless hours at the oak tree, trying to understand the ancient rituals, the stories of the Watchers, and the deep-rooted connection between the town and the land. But she knew that she couldn't do it alone. The townspeople had to be a part of this too. They needed to learn to honor the land, to respect its past, and to carry its lessons into the future. The next day, Clara called a meeting in the town hall. It had been a long time since the people of Ashbrook had gathered together for anything other than a crisis. But Clara knew that this was different. This was about the future of the town, about its connection to the land, and about ensuring that the mistakes of the past were never repeated. As the townspeople trickled into the hall, Clara stood at the front, her heart pounding. She could feel their eyes on her, a mix of curiosity and wariness. She had become something of a legend in Ashbrook, a symbol of hope and strength, but she was also an outsider, a stranger who had arrived in the midst of the town's darkest days. Now, she had to prove that she was more than just a keeper of the past. She had to show them that she could help guide them into the future. "Thank you all for coming," Clara began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know it hasn't been easy. The shadows are gone, and the Watcher is bound, but there is still work to be done. Ashbrook has always been a place of deep history, a town shaped by its past. But that history doesn't have to define us. We can learn from it, honor it, and move forward." The townspeople exchanged glances, some nodding, others unsure. Clara could see the hesitation in their eyes. They had lived with the weight of the past for so long. It was hard to imagine a future without it looming over them. "We've all felt the pull of the past," Clara continued, "but now we have the chance to shape our own future. The land is alive, and it has been waiting for us to listen. We are its stewards now. We must respect its power, its memory, and its lessons. But we must also remember that the land is not just a place to be feared. It is a place to be cherished." Clara paused, letting her words sink in. She could feel the tension in the room, but she also felt a shift, a subtle change in the air. The people were beginning to listen, beginning to understand that the land wasn't just a silent witness to their lives. It was an active participant in their future. The following weeks were a blur of activity. Clara worked with the townspeople to organize a ritual of renewal, one that would honor the land and its history, but also mark a new beginning for Ashbrook. It would be a ceremony of unity, where the people would come together to reaffirm their bond with the land and each other. The ritual would take place at the oak tree, the heart of Ashbrook. It was the place where the past had been bound and the future could begin. Clara had spent hours preparing for the ceremony, gathering the materials she would need, and ensuring that everyone understood their role. It was a delicate balance, one that required the cooperation of every person in the town. On the day of the ritual, the sky was clear, and the air was filled with a sense of anticipation. The townspeople gathered at the oak tree, their faces a mix of excitement and apprehension. Clara stood at the front, her heart racing. This was it, the moment when Ashbrook would choose its future. "Today, we renew our bond with the land," Clara began, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "We honor the past, but we also look to the future. Together, we will heal the land, heal ourselves, and move forward as one." The townspeople stepped forward, each one holding a small token, a piece of stone, a sprig of ivy, a handful of earth, symbols of their connection to the land. Clara led them in the ancient chant she had learned from Emma's journals, the words rising in unison as the energy of the land began to hum beneath their feet. As the ritual progressed, Clara could feel the land responding. The oak tree's roots seemed to pulse with life, its branches swaying as if in response to the collective energy of the people. The wind picked up, swirling around them, carrying with it the scent of earth and pine. And then, as the final words of the chant were spoken, a brilliant light enveloped the tree. The land seemed to breathe, its energy rising up from the earth, filling the air with a sense of renewal. The people of Ashbrook stood together, their hands linked, their hearts united in their commitment to the future. The ritual of renewal marked the beginning of a new chapter for Ashbrook. The town, once haunted by the ghosts of its past, now stood as a place of hope and growth. The people had come together to honor the land, to understand its history, and to ensure that they would not be bound by it. Clara, standing beneath the oak tree, felt a deep sense of peace. The whispers of the past had faded, and the land felt alive with possibility. The town was no longer defined by the curse or the Watchers. It was defined by the choices they made, by the future they would build together. As Clara looked around at the people of Ashbrook, she saw something new in their eyes. It was a sense of purpose, of determination. They had learned the lessons of the past, and now they were ready to move forward. The land, too, had changed. The once oppressive weight of the curse had lifted, and the earth felt lighter, more vibrant. The oak tree stood tall, its branches reaching toward the sky, a symbol of the town's resilience and renewal. Clara smiled, knowing that her work was far from over. As the keeper, she would continue to guide the town, ensuring that the land remained protected and that its history was honored. But she also knew that Ashbrook's future was in the hands of its people. They were no longer bound by the past. They were free to shape their own destiny. And as Clara looked out over the town, she knew that Ashbrook was ready for whatever the future held. Months passed since the ritual of renewal, and Ashbrook had flourished in ways that Clara could hardly have imagined. The town was no longer weighed down by the fear of the past, and its people had embraced the future with a renewed sense of hope. The oak tree, still standing tall, had become a symbol of their strength and resilience. The once dark and oppressive air that had clung to the town had lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and unity. Yet, despite the peace, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lingering, hidden just beneath the surface. The Watcher had been bound, its influence sealed, but Clara had come to realize that the Watcher's legacy was more than just a shadow of the past. It was a part of the land itself, a part of Ashbrook's very soul. And though the Watcher no longer had the power to control the town, its presence remained, woven into the fabric of the place. Clara had spent countless hours studying the land, searching for any signs of disturbance, any lingering traces of the Watcher's influence. The more she learned, the more she understood that the Watcher had not just been a single entity, it had been a manifestation of the land's collective memory, its pain, its history. And as long as Ashbrook existed, that memory would never truly fade. One evening, as Clara stood beneath the oak tree, her fingers brushing against its gnarled bark, she felt a familiar pull, a subtle tug at the edges of her consciousness. It was the same feeling she had experienced when she first arrived in Ashbrook, the same sense of something watching, something waiting. She closed her eyes, focusing on the sensation. The wind whispered through the branches of the tree, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the Watcher, not exactly, but something else, a presence, a force that had been awakened by the ritual of renewal. The land was alive, and it was speaking to her. Clara knew that she had to understand this new presence, this force that seemed to have been stirred by the ritual. It was not the Watcher itself, but it was connected to the land in ways that were still unclear. She felt a deep sense of responsibility, not just to the town, but to the land itself. She had been chosen as the keeper for a reason, and now it was time to uncover the full extent of her role. The next morning, Clara gathered the townspeople again, this time at the oak tree. They had come to trust her, to look to her for guidance, and Clara knew that she couldn't face this new challenge alone. "Something has changed," Clara began, her voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency. "The land has awakened in a way that I didn't expect. It's not the Watcher, but something else, something deep within the earth, connected to Ashbrook's very soul." The townspeople exchanged nervous glances, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. Clara could feel their unease, but she also saw a spark of determination in their eyes. They had faced darkness before, and they had emerged stronger for it. Now, they would face whatever this new presence was together. "We must understand what this force is," Clara continued. "We must learn to work with it, to ensure that it does not overwhelm us. The land is not just a place, it is a living, breathing entity. And as its stewards, we must listen to its need." The townspeople nodded, and Clara could sense their willingness to help. They had learned the value of unity, and now they would have to put that lesson into practice once more. Clara spent the following days preparing for a new ritual, one that would allow her to connect with the land on a deeper level. She gathered herbs, stones, and other sacred items, each chosen for its connection to the earth. The ritual would be a way to commune with the land, to understand the force that had been awakened, and to ensure that it would not spiral out of control. On the night of the ritual, Clara stood once more beneath the oak tree, the full moon casting a silvery glow over the land. The air was thick with anticipation, and Clara could feel the energy of the earth pulsing beneath her feet. The townspeople had gathered in a circle around her, their faces illuminated by the soft light of the candles they had placed on the ground. Clara began the chant, her voice steady and calm as she called upon the forces of the earth. The ground beneath her seemed to vibrate, and the wind picked up, swirling around the circle. Clara closed her eyes, focusing on the energy that was rising from the earth. It was ancient, powerful, and it filled her with both awe and fear. As the ritual progressed, Clara could feel the land reaching out to her, its presence overwhelming yet comforting. She saw flashes of visions, memories of Ashbrook's past, moments of pain and joy, of struggle and survival. The land had absorbed everything, every emotion, every experience. It was a living memory, a collective consciousness that had been shaped by the people who had lived there. But there was something else, something darker. As Clara delved deeper into the connection, she felt a shadow creeping along the edges of her mind. It was faint, but it was there, an echo of the Watcher's influence, still lingering, still trying to assert itself. Clara gasped, her heart racing. She had thought the Watcher was gone, but it wasn't. It had never truly left. It had been bound, yes, but its essence had been absorbed into the land itself. And now, it was awakening once more. Clara fought to maintain control, her mind racing as she struggled to understand what was happening. The Watcher's influence was not just a malevolent force, it was a part of the land's history, a manifestation of its collective memory. It had been bound, but not destroyed. And now, it was attempting to reclaim its power. The wind howled around her, the earth trembling beneath her feet. Clara could feel the Watcher's presence pressing in on her, its influence trying to take root once more. But she would not let it. She had learned the lessons of the past, and she would not allow Ashbrook to fall back into the darkness. With a surge of will, Clara reached out to the land, calling upon the energy she had connected with during the ritual. She focused all of her strength on the oak tree, the heart of Ashbrook, and called upon its power to help her bind the Watcher once more. The earth responded, the roots of the tree stretching deep into the ground, wrapping around the Watcher's essence, holding it in place. Clara could feel the struggle, the resistance, but she did not relent. The Watcher had no place in Ashbrook's future. With a final, forceful push, Clara sealed the Watcher's influence once more. The earth trembled one last time, and then all was still. Clara collapsed to her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The ritual had taken everything from her, but she knew that it was necessary. The Watcher's influence had been bound once more, but it was not gone. It was a part of Ashbrook's history, and it would always be there, lurking beneath the surface. The townspeople rushed to her side, their faces filled with concern. Clara looked up at them, a sense of peace settling over her. The land had been saved, but it had also been understood. Ashbrook's history was not something to be feared, it was something to be honored. "We are its stewards," Clara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "And we must always listen." As the sun began to rise, casting its golden light over Ashbrook, Clara knew that the land would always be a part of her. The Watcher, though bound, would remain, but it was no longer a threat. It was a reminder that the past could never be erased, but it could be understood and respected. And as long as Clara stood as the keeper, Ashbrook would always have a chance to move forward. While Clara had long been Ashbrook's keeper, guiding the town and its people through the shadows of its past, she had come to realize that her role was evolving. The land no longer needed her to simply protect it from the Watcher's lingering influence. Now, it was about something deeper, helping Ashbrook and its people grow in harmony with the land's ancient rhythms. But Clara knew that the time was coming when she would need to pass on her mantle. The land had chosen her, but it would choose someone else in time. She had always understood that being the keeper was not a permanent title. It was a role that shifted with the needs of the town and the land. And Ashbrook was no longer a place of fear or turmoil. It was a town reborn, full of promise and potential. Her thoughts turned to Emma, who had played such a crucial role in helping her understand the land's mysteries. Emma had been the first to see Clara's potential, to guide her through the trials of Ashbrook's dark history. Clara had often wondered what Emma's role would be in the town's future. Now, she knew that Emma was not just a part of Ashbrook's past, she was part of its future. It had been years since Emma had left Ashbrook, her journey taking her far beyond the town's borders. Clara had kept in touch with her over the years, but Emma had always felt the pull of the wider world, the need to explore, to understand. She had been a scholar, a wanderer, someone who sought knowledge in the farthest corners of the earth. But now, she was returning to Ashbrook. Clara had not expected Emma's return so soon. The world beyond Ashbrook had changed, and Emma had grown into someone even more powerful than Clara remembered. When Emma arrived, it was not as the scholar who had once helped Clara unravel the town's mysteries. It was as someone who had come to take her place. Clara met Emma at the edge of the oak tree, the place where their paths had first crossed so many years ago. The tree stood as a silent witness to their shared history, its branches heavy with the weight of time. Emma stood before her, her face serene, but there was a fire in her eyes, a recognition of the land's power, and a deep understanding of her role within it. "I knew you'd come back," Clara said softly, her voice tinged with both relief and sadness. "Ashbrook has changed, but the land still calls to you." Emma smiled, her eyes flickering with the same intensity that Clara had once seen in her own. "I never truly left, Clara, not in spirit, but it's time. The land has spoken. It's time for a new keeper." Clara nodded, her heart heavy with the knowledge that her time as the sole keeper was coming to an end. She had been the one to break the curse, to bind the Watcher, to guide Ashbrook through its darkest hours. But the land had chosen Emma to carry the mantle forward. The passing of the mantle was not a simple ceremony. It was a rite of passage, one that would ensure the town and its land remained protected, guided, and honored. Clara had spent the past few months preparing Emma, teaching her the ancient ways, the rituals, and the deep connection to the land. Emma had always been a quick learner, but Clara knew that this was more than just knowledge. It was a bond, an understanding that could not be easily taught. The townspeople gathered once more beneath the oak tree, the heart of Ashbrook. They had witnessed Clara's rise as the keeper, and now they would witness the passing of the mantle. The air was thick with anticipation, but there was no fear. The people trusted Clara, and they trusted Emma. They knew that Ashbrook's future was in good hands. Clara stood before the crowd, her heart full of gratitude. "I have walked this path for many years," she began, her voice steady. "And now, it is time for me to pass the mantle of keeper to someone who will carry it with the same strength, wisdom, and love that this land deserves. She turned to Emma, who stood beside her, her hands resting gently on the earth. Emma, you have always understood the land. You have always listened to its whispers. And now, it is your time to guide Ashbrook, to ensure that the lessons of the past are honored and that the future remains bright. Emma stepped forward, her hands raised in a gesture of reverence. She took Clara's hands in her own, the connection between them deep and unspoken. The land seemed to hum beneath their feet, a quiet acknowledgement of the transition that was taking place. Clara's heart swelled with pride as she placed her hands on the oak tree's bark, feeling its pulse beneath her fingertips. The tree had been her guide, her anchor, and now it would be Emma's. Clara could feel the land's approval, its recognition of Emma as the new keeper. "May you always listen," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "May you always honor the land, as it has honored us." As the ritual concluded, the townspeople cheered, their voices rising in celebration. Ashbrook had come full circle, from a town haunted by its past to one that had embraced its future. The land had healed, and now it was time for the people to continue their journey, guided by Emma's wisdom and Clara's legacy. Clara stepped back, watching as Emma stood at the center of the circle, her eyes closed in concentration. The wind stirred around her, the earth seemed to pulse beneath her feet, and the oak tree's branches swayed as if in approval. Clara knew that Emma was ready. The mantle had passed, and the land had accepted her. But Clara also knew that her work was not over. She would always be a part of Ashbrook, always be a part of the land. She had not abandoned her role as keeper. She had simply become something else, something more. She was no longer the one to guide Ashbrook, but she was the one to watch over it, to ensure that Emma had the space to grow and flourish in her new role. The land had a way of choosing its keepers, and Clara understood now that her time had passed. She would remain a part of Ashbrook's history, but Emma would carry it into the future. As Clara walked away from the oak tree, she felt the land beneath her feet, solid and steady. She knew that Ashbrook was in good hands. The future was bright, and the land would continue to thrive. And so, the story of Ashbrook continued, its history, its people, and its land forever intertwined.